Under the Arizona sun, that pressed down like a sealed lid, the desert had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. A horse froze dead in the white sand, ears flat against its skull, body locked tight, as a fist. The rider sat motionless. Reins loose. The silence was absolute, no insects, no birds picking at carrion, no wind moving through brush. Then a thin moan carried on air that wasn't really blowing. From the highest rock shelf he looked out across the flat. People. Maybe 40 of them. Staggering through the dunes like ghosts that hadn't been told they were already dead. Falling. Rising. Dragging others by the arm, by the waist, by whatever grip still held. He could climb back down, mount up, and ride on toward the wage, and the bunk waiting 2 weeks northwest. Or he could go into that valley and become part of whatever this was. He went down. Arizona Territory. 1863, 6 days out from Tucson, and the land had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was. No green left to speak of. No promise of shade beyond the thin kind a man made for himself, hat brim low, collar up, moving only when moving cost less than standing still. Cole Ashford had a letter folded in his saddlebag confirming a position at the Whitfield spread, 2 weeks' ride northwest, foreman's work, decent wage, a bunkhouse roof that didn't leak. He'd read that letter more times than a man rightly needed to. Not because the words changed. Because reading it reminded him he was still, technically, headed somewhere. Still, technically, a man with a plan instead of a man just letting the horse decide. A year now since he'd worn a uniform. A year of moving, from one temporary thing to the next, driving cattle here, breaking horses there, scouting for outfits that needed a man who knew how to read country nobody else trusted. He was good at it. Had gotten good at it fast, the way a man gets good at anything he throws himself into entirely because the alternative is sitting still long enough to feel what he's actually carrying. The horse stopped first. Not slowed. Not hesitated. Stopped. Dead in the sand like it had hit a wall nobody else could see. Cole Ashford sat there a moment. Reins loose in his hands. Because he'd learned a long time ago not to fight an animal that knew something he didn't. Easy, he said. Low. Just breath, really. The horse didn't answer. Horses never did. But its ears went back flat against its skull, and its whole body went tight like a fist, and that was answer enough. He'd ridden through country like this most of a year now. Rock and heat and nothing. And in that year, he'd learned exactly one rule that never failed him. When the horse gets scared, there's a reason. Could be snakes. Could be men with worse intentions than snakes. Could be something he hadn't met yet and didn't want to. He swung down slow. Boots hit sand. Hand on the horse's neck, flat, calming, the way you'd calm somebody crying in the dark, except this wasn't a person, this was a gelding named Duke, who had never once spooked at nothing. So something was out there. He stood a moment. Listening. Nothing. That was the thing about this desert. It didn't sound empty. It sounded held. Like the whole world was pinching its lips shut on a secret. No insects. No birds picking at carrion, and there was always a bird picking at carrion out here, always, except now. No wind moving through brush. Just heat. Pressing down. Waiting. Cole had knelt beside a burying ground once, quieter than this. He remembered exactly what that kind of quiet felt like pressed flat against his back. He hadn't wanted to feel it again. Not ever. And here it was anyway, waiting for him like it had known all along he'd come back around to it. He'd married Rachel 2 months before the regiment called him east. 2 months. That was the whole of it, start to finish, and some nights he still couldn't decide if that made the marriage a gift or a cruelty, giving him just enough of her to know exactly what he'd be missing for however long the war saw fit to keep him. She'd stood at the gate when he rode out. Hadn't cried. Rachel wasn't a crying woman, not in front of him anyway, not where it might slow him down, or make the leaving harder than it already was. She just said, "Come back whole, Cole Ashford." Not come back safe. Come back whole. As if she already understood there might be some difference between the two. He hadn't managed either, in the end. The fever took her in a spring he wasn't there for. Took her fast, the letter said, though fast was a word doctors used to comfort men who weren't there to know better. By the time that letter found him, 3 states off, riding scout for officers, who never once asked whether a man had somebody waiting on him, there wasn't a home left standing to ride back to. Just a name on a stone, and a sister-in-law, who couldn't quite meet his eyes, when he finally did make it home to see it. He didn't let himself finish that thought all the way through anymore. Hadn't in over a year. He cut it off now the same practiced way he always did, hand tightening on Duke's neck, jaw setting, eyes forward. A man could carry a thing like that forever, if he was careful about how he packed it. Cole had gotten careful. Had to. Then he heard it. A moan. Thin. Almost nothing. Carried on wind, that wasn't really blowing, more like the air itself had decided to move, that one sound, and nothing else. He froze. Another moan. Then another. Stacking on top of each other, faint, layered, like a hymn nobody had the strength left to finish singing. His stomach dropped, before his mind caught up to why. He tied off the horse. Climbed the nearest rock shelf, boots scraping, hands raw against hot stone, and at the top he shielded his eyes, and looked out across the flat, and what he saw made something in his chest go very still. People. Maybe 40 of them. Staggering through the dunes like ghosts, that hadn't been told, yet they were dead. Falling. Rising. Some dragging others by the arm, by the waist, by whatever grip still held. A death march. He'd seen death marches before. In the war. Men walking because stopping meant dying, and walking wasn't much better, and everybody knew it, and nobody said it out loud, because saying it out loud was its own kind of surrender. Apache. He knew the shape of them even from this distance. The way they moved even in ruin, there was a discipline underneath the collapse, like a fire stomped down to almost nothing, that was still, technically, fire. He'd never seen them like this, though. Broken. That was the only word for it. Not defeated in a fight. Defeated by thirst, which was crueler, because thirst didn't care about honor, didn't care about courage, didn't care about anything at all. Something happened to them. Something bigger than bad luck, bigger than a wrong turn in bad country. He didn't know it yet, but he could feel the shape of it the way you feel a storm coming, before the sky ever changes color. And now he had to decide something. He could climb back down. Get on Duke. Ride on to the Whitfield spread, where a job, and a bunk, and a wage were waiting on him, a life he'd half built out of nothing, after the war took the other one clean away. Or he could climb down, into that valley, and become part of whatever this was. He'd made a choice like this once before. It came back to him now, whole, the way certain memories do, when the moment demands it, and won't take no for an answer. A wagon train, pinned down along a dry ridge 2 days south of the Colorado line. Riflemen dug into rock above them, taking their time about it, the way men do, when they know the ones below can't run, and can't hide either. His captain had said leave them. Said it flat, said it twice, like repetition alone might make it true. We've got orders. We've got a schedule to keep. Those wagons aren't ours to save. Cole remembered turning his horse around anyway. Remembered the captain's voice rising behind him, sharp, furious, calling him back, calling him a fool, calling him worse, before he was done. He hadn't listened. Because there'd been a woman in that wagon train holding a rifle she didn't know how to fire, and an old man trying to load a pistol, with hands shaking too hard to manage it, and a schedule, whatever that schedule had been for, Cole never did find out, wasn't worth what leaving them behind would have cost him to carry afterward. He'd taken a bullet through the shoulder, pulling the last of them clear. Carried that wound 6 more months, before it finally, officially, cost him his discharge. A scout who couldn't draw fast enough wasn't worth the army's grain any longer, they told him, polite about it, like politeness made the sentence kinder. He didn't regret it. Not once. Not even on the bad nights, and there had been plenty of those. He stood there a long moment on that rock shelf, 40 strangers moving below him, through heat that wanted them dead. Because that's what a man does, when the decision actually matters. He stands there. He lets it cost him something, before he makes it. Then he went down. Up close, it was worse. Up close, it was always worse. That was another thing the war had taught him, and he'd hoped never to need again. Lips split and dark with dried blood. Grown women carrying bundles of blanket and cloth that Cole made himself not look at too closely, because there wasn't a way to look at that and keep walking forward, with his legs steady under him. Old men and old women, with eyes gone glassy, staring at nothing, or maybe staring at everything, it was hard to tell which was worse. Days. They'd been without water for days. He didn't need anyone to tell him that. The body announces it. The body doesn't lie about a thing like that, ever, no matter what a man wants to believe. An old woman sat propped against a rock, murmuring something over and over, low, rhythmic, the same handful of words on a loop, that Cole realized, after a moment, wasn't words at all anymore. Just breath shaped like words used to be, worn down past meaning by repetition and thirst both. A warrior nearby had given up standing entirely, sat instead with his back against a boulder, eyes half closed, chest working too hard for too little air. He looked up as Cole passed. Didn't ask for anything. Just watched, the particular kind of watching men do, when they've stopped expecting help to arrive, and are simply cataloging, out of habit, whatever crosses their vision, before the end. Cole made himself keep walking past both of them without stopping. Tria. Another word from the war he'd hoped to leave behind, with everything else the war had taught him. You couldn't save the ones already past saving by wasting time you didn't have standing over them. A man separated from the group and came toward him. Tall. Built like something exhausted down to its frame, but the frame itself was iron. Eagle feathers woven into hair gone gray at the temples. A scar cutting from eye to jaw, old, pale, a story Cole would probably never hear the whole of. But it was the eyes that stopped him. Sharp. Measuring. Not begging. Weighing. Friend or threat. Water or trap. Cole understood that look, because he'd worn it himself, more than once, in more than one war, on more than one road, that hadn't cared whether he lived to finish walking it. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. He unslung his canteen, and held it out, and that was a sentence in any language that had ever existed. The man took it. Didn't drink. Cole watched him carry it instead to an old woman, who could barely stand on her own legs, and pour water past her lips like it was the only thing that mattered in the whole burning world. Then to another. Then another. 5 people drank, before the man allowed himself a swallow. 1 swallow. Small. Measured same as his eyes. That told Cole everything he needed to know about the kind of man this was. Lone timber. He touched his own chest. Voice rough as gravel dragged over gravel, but steady. Cole! He mirrored the gesture, hand to his own chest, and something passed between them that didn't need translating either. There wasn't time to stand around trading names, though. Cole had spent enough seasons patching up men in worse country than this to know the difference between somebody who needed water and somebody who needed more than water could fix by itself. He moved among them. Quick. Practiced. Checked wrists, checked eyes, the way an army surgeon had once shown him during a long winter, with nothing else to do but learn. A man with a leg wrapped in cloth gone stiff and dark. Cole knelt, unwrapped it careful, found the wound beneath, a graze old, 3 or 4 days healed wrong, infection creeping at the edges of it. This needs cleaning, he said, mostly to himself, because nobody standing near him spoke enough English to answer. He used what was left in his second canteen, poured it slow over the wound despite knowing exactly how precious every drop had become. Tore a strip from his own shirt for a fresh wrap. The man watched him work with an expression Cole couldn't quite name. Somewhere between suspicion and disbelief that a stranger would spend water like this on a leg that wasn't his own to spend it on. Lone Timber watched too. Filed it away, the same careful way he seemed to file away everything. Through science. Through the handful of English words Lone Timber carried like coins he was rationing, the larger story came apart in pieces. "Soldiers," Lone Timber said. "Come to our water. Fill it with." He struggled. Made a gesture, hand twisting like something poisoned, something ruined on purpose. "Poisoned the wells?" Cole said quietly. "So you couldn't go back?" Lone Timber nodded once. Slow. Like the word itself cost him something to hear said plain out loud. 3 weeks. He went on. Walking. No home behind. No home ahead. Only. He gestured at the whole burning horizon, at the nothing stretching in every direction like a punishment, with no end written into it. Cole felt something cold settle behind his ribs, that had nothing to do with the heat. This wasn't an accident. Wasn't bad luck, bad water, bad timing. Somebody had done this on purpose, had made a calculation, that 40 lives were worth less than whatever they wanted this land to become instead. He filed that thought away too. There'd be time for it later. Right now there were 40 people, and 2 days, without water between them, and whatever came next. "Water gone," Lone Timber said. 2 days. Cole did the math in his head, fast, the same cold math he used to do counting ammunition, counting hours of daylight, counting how many men could still walk versus how many would need carrying. His canteens would buy them a few hours between them. Maybe. Not enough. Not even close. And the sun was still climbing. He remembered his grandfather, Ezra Ashford. 40 years a trapper and scout in this country, before Cole was ever born. A man who'd ridden, with soldiers and traders, and men from a dozen tribes, and had learned, somewhere in all, that riding, more secrets about this land than any one man had a right to carry alone. Nights by the fire. Cole a boy then, half asleep on a bedroll, and his grandfather's voice like a low drum going on, and on into the dark. "Where the stone eagle spreads its wings," Ezra used to say. Pipe smoke curling up past, that voice like it was part of the story too. "There the earth hides its best kept secret. When the sun sits highest, and the eagle's shadow points east. Walk 50 steps. There, boy. Among the red rock. You'll find what other men go looking for their whole lives, and never find." Young Cole had asked him once, "How do you know it's true, Grandpa?" And Ezra had just smiled, that slow smile, that never gave a straight answer to a straight question, and said, "Some things a man doesn't need to know are true. He just needs to know where to look when the time comes." Cole had never needed that story. Not once in 28 years. Until now. He turned. Scanned the horizon the way his grandfather taught him, not looking for a thing, looking for a shape. Rock everywhere. Wind carved. Water carved, if you could believe that, in a place this dry, but stone remembers rain even after the sky forgets how to make it. Then he saw it. Off in the shimmer. A formation that, from this exact angle, and only this angle, looked like something, with wings spread wide. Frozen mid-flight in red stone for however many thousand years. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Could be. Had to be. He pointed. "Water," he said. Simple. Then he mimed drinking, from cupped hands, in case the word meant nothing at all to the man in front of him. Lone Timber's eyes lit, just a spark, just for a second, hope trying to catch in dry kindling. But before he could answer, a voice cut through the air like a blade drawn fast. A warrior, no older than 25, planted himself between Cole and the group like a wall built out of pure fury. His whole body was coiled. A puma deciding whether to strike. Black eyes burning. He spoke fast, hard, in Apache, and pointed at Cole the way a man points at something rotten. No translation needed. Cole had heard that tone before too. In every language men used it. Liar. Trap. Follow him, and we all die out here together. 3 more warriors moved in behind him. Fast. Hands drifting near knife handles. A human wall closing in a circle that didn't need words to explain itself. Lone Timber raised a hand. Spoke, measured, firm, an authority worn smooth from years of use. The young man answered. Louder. Challenging. His arms swept toward the Eagle Rocks, and back toward Cole like he was tearing the idea itself in half. Cole didn't move. Kept his hands loose, open, visible. Kept his weight easy. One wrong twitch, and this went from an argument to a killing, and 40 lives were standing on that knife's edge whether they understood it yet or not. The argument went on. Lone Timber pointed toward the group. The elders. The women. The young warrior pointed at Cole. Then at the empty horizon, wide and mocking, as if to say, there. Look! Nothing out there, but more of the same nothing that's already killing us slow. Finally Lone Timber spoke in a voice that seemed to still even the stones around them. The young man stepped back. Furious. Obedient. His eyes never once left Cole's face. And in those eyes was a promise plain as any spoken word. I'm watching you. One mistake. You go down first. Lone Timber turned to Cole. Fast current, he said, touching the young warrior's shoulder. Chose the English carefully, like a man picking his way across broken glass. My nephew. He does not trust. Then he touched his own chest. I choose to trust. Cole nodded once. Slow. Trust hadn't been earned here. Only its absence had been delayed a little while. Night came down on them, before they'd covered more than a mile toward the rocks. Lone Timber called a halt, not for rest, exactly, more like an admission that some of the group couldn't take another step in the dark, without risking a fall that wouldn't get back up. They made a cold camp. No fires worth mentioning, nothing that used water to boil or cook, just bodies huddled close for warmth against the desert that turned vicious cold the instant the sun quit its work. Cole sat apart, the way he always did, close enough to be useful, and far enough to not intrude. Duke cropped at what sparse brush he could find nearby. Lone Timber came and sat near him anyway. Didn't ask permission. Just settled onto a flat rock like it was owed to him. You have wife, Lone Timber said. Not a question. More an observation, the kind old men make, when they've spent a lifetime reading faces instead of words. Cole didn't answer right away. Had, he said finally. Lone Timber nodded slow. Didn't press further. Just let the words sit there between them a while, the way you let a wound sit open, before you decide whether it needs more tending, or just time. Storm came for you too, then, Lone Timber said eventually. Not the kind with rain. No. Cole looked up at the stars instead of at the chief. Easier that way. Not the kind with rain. Above them, the desert sky did the one thing it did better than any other sky Cole had ever slept beneath. It opened up completely, no clouds, no haze, nothing standing between a man, and more stars than he could ever hope to name. Somewhere off in the dark, a coyote called once, thin and lonesome, and got no answer, and didn't call again. They sat alone, while after that without talking. Cole found he didn't mind the quiet, not with this particular man beside him. Some silences accuse a person. This one didn't. Soldiers who did this, Cole said finally. You know why. Lone Timber's jaw tightened. Land, he said. Simple. Final, like a door closing. Always land. No. He gestured vaguely west, toward hills Cole couldn't see in the dark, but knew were there. Now something in the ground too. Men come with hammers. Stakes. Papers nobody reads to us, before they plant them. Cole filed that away with everything else. Papers. Stakes. Somebody surveying ground that used to belong to nobody, but the people standing on it. He didn't like the shape that was taking, even half-formed, as it was. This is not the first time, Lone Timber said after a while. voice quieter now, worn down to something closer to confession than conversation. I have led these people 11 years. 3 times now, we have been made to leave ground we called home. 3 times I have told them, further on, it will be better. Further on, we will be safe. Was it? Better, I mean. Lone Timber was quiet a long moment. For a while. Always for a while. He looked into the fire like it might offer him something the desert hadn't. I have buried more of my people than I have welcomed new ones into this world. That is the arithmetic of a chief in this territory, Cole Ashford. Some years, the numbers do not favor us. Cole didn't have anything worth saying to that. Some griefs don't want company. They just want to be heard once, plainly, by somebody willing to sit still long enough to receive them. Why do you keep leading then? Cole asked eventually. After all that. Because the alternative is nobody leading at all. Lone Timber managed something close to a tired smile. And a people, with no one steering them, drown faster than a people steered poorly. I would rather steer poorly, and be wrong sometimes, than not steer at all. He stood then, joints stiff, weariness plain in every motion. Set a hand briefly on Cole's shoulder, before walking back toward his own fire. Sleep if you can, Lone Timber said. Tomorrow asks more of all of us. Cole sat along, while after that, alone, looking up at more stars than a man could ever hope to count, thinking about arithmetic that didn't favor anybody, and about a young widower's own private ledger of losses that hadn't balanced right in over a year. Maybe that was something they shared, in the end. 2 men doing sums that never came out even, no matter how many times they ran the numbers. They set out again before first light. The Eagle Rocks rose closer, with every hour, wings spread against the sky that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to be blue or white with heat. The illusion held perfect, from a distance, a bird frozen mid-flight, watching over ground that had swallowed better men than any of them walking beneath it now. The land between camp and rock told its own story, if a man knew how to read it. Bleached ribs of some animal long dead, picked white and smooth as bone china. A wash of dry riverbed cutting through the flat like a scar that had never quite healed over. Cactus standing sentinel in 2s and 3s, arms raised the way men raised their arms in surrender, or maybe in prayer. It was hard to say which out here, where the two had a way of looking almost the same. Heat shimmered up off the ground in waves that bent the horizon, made the Eagle Rocks seem to hover, weightless, impossible, a mirage that might dissolve the instant anybody got close enough to touch it. Cole had seen that trick of the light plenty of times before. Had learned, the hard way, not to trust it completely, until his own boots were standing on the ground in question. The sun sat on them like a lid. Like something poured molten, and left to harden right, over their heads. Every step kicked dust, that clung to sweat, and by mid-morning the whole procession had gone the color of the ground itself. Mud statues. Moving barely. Nobody talked. Because talking cost water, and water was the one thing nobody had left to spend. Cole felt it pressing on his shoulders. A weight that had nothing to do with the heat. What if he was wrong? What if his grandfather's story was just a story? Old men by fires told 100 stories, and half of them were true, and half of them were just good, and Ezra Ashford had loved a good story more than most men loved their own children. An hour in, a rider fell back to walk his horse beside Cole's. Fast current. Silent at first, matching pace, saying nothing, which was its own kind of statement after yesterday. You fought, Fast Current said eventually. Not a question either, same as his uncle's habit. In the soldiers' war. The one between themselves. Some of it. Which side? Union. Cole glanced over. Does it matter to you which? No. Fast Current's mouth twisted, something almost like humor in it, buried deep. Both sides took our land, before they started arguing about who should keep the rest of it. Cole had no answer for that. Didn't try to build one. Some truths didn't need defending, and that was one of them. Why do you help us? Fast Current asked. Sharper now. Truly. Not the water. That I understand. Water is easy. Why do you stay after? Cole thought about it a moment, before answering, because the young man deserved better than a quick, comfortable lie. Because I rode away from something once, he said. Back east. Told myself I had good reasons. Maybe I did. But I've had a long time to sit with that decision since, and it doesn't sit easy. Figured I wouldn't make the same mistake twice, if I could help it. Fast Current studied him a long moment. Didn't quite trust it. Didn't quite dismiss it either. We'll see, he said, and rode on ahead. Behind him. A sound. Someone going down. Cole turned in time to see an old woman near the back of the line, knees buckling in the sand, too weak now even, with help to stay upright any longer. Fast Current was there, before Cole could even turn his horse. Lifted her. Carried her across his shoulders like she weighed nothing at all, though Cole caught the tremble in the younger man's own legs. Even the strongest ones were close to the edge now. A young woman hurried alongside them, murmuring something low and steady, the kind of voice meant to hold a person together, through sheer will alone. Turquoise stone at her throat, dust dulled, catching what little light the white sky allowed to be gentle. Cole noticed her, because she was the only one, besides Lone Timber and Fast Current, who wasn't moving like the desert had already half won. She caught him looking. Held it a second longer than politeness required. Didn't smile. Didn't look away either. Cole broke the look first. Turned Duke forward. Told himself it didn't mean anything. A tired man noticing a tired woman doing kind work in a line of 40 people, who all deserved noticing. He almost believed himself. We must hurry, Lone Timber said, at Cole's side, English broken but clear enough. Hours. Maybe 3. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Cole spurred Duke faster. Careful. Not so fast the weakest fell behind, not so slow the sun won this, before they got there. They reached the base, and Cole slid down, and studied the rock like it owed him an answer. The sun wasn't there yet. Not quite. Grandfather's story said noon exact. The eagle's shadow pointing east like an arrow drawn by the whole sky at once. We wait, Cole said. Pointed up. Lone Timber's face went dark. And Fast Current, who'd set the old woman down in the thin shade of a cactus taller than a man, Willow Song kneeling beside her, fanning her face, with a strip of cloth, came striding over fast, temper hot as the ground beneath him. He spoke rapid Apache. Pointed at the sun. At the group, at the ones barely upright. At Cole. He says. Lone Timber's voice was tired now, worn thin as the rest of them. You brought us here. To die. While we wait. Tell him. Cole kept his voice even. If we move now, not knowing where, we die for certain. This is a gamble. He said it plain, because it was plain. I know that. But it's the only one we've got. Lone Timber translated. Fast Current's answer was to spit in the sand at Cole's boots. An insult needing no translation in any culture on earth. But he didn't leave. Stood there. Arms crossed. Watching Cole's every breath like it might be the one that gave the whole lie away. The minutes crawled. Cole watched that shadow move, with a slowness that felt almost cruel. Almost designed. As if the sun itself was testing how much a man could stand to wait, before he broke. His mind kept sliding sideways on him, the way it did sometimes under pressure like this, back to the ridge, with the rifleman dug in, back to the moment, before he turned his horse around against direct orders. Same feeling exactly. That same edge, where a man's whole life balances on a decision he can't take back once he's made it. Except this time there was no captain shouting behind him to leave them. Just silence. And waiting. And a shadow that refused to hurry. The group had gone quiet in a way that scared him more than crying would have. Some of the women hummed low songs he didn't understand a word of. Didn't need to. Grief and prayer sound the same in every tongue, low and repeating, begging something bigger than themselves for one mercy, just one, before the day finished what it had started. Then a cry. An old warrior, a man Cole hadn't spoken with, hadn't even properly seen, until now, half carried the last mile by two others, went rigid. Convulsed. His breath came in short awful pulls, that everyone standing near him could hear. His name was Grey Feather, Lone Timber had told him earlier. An elder. A man who'd walked this desert longer than Cole had been alive, walked it now for what might be the last time. His lips had gone the color of a bruise. Lone Timber rushed to him. Cradled the old man's head, spoke fast and low, words meant only for him. Now. Fast current, wheeling on Cole, voice cracking with something that wasn't quite anger anymore. There is no more time. Cole looked up. The shadow. Almost there. Almost. But the old man's ragged breathing made the decision, before Cole's mind could finish weighing it. He pulled his canteen, the last of it, the very last swallow he had left in this world, and pressed it into Lone Timber's hands. For him. A few drops. That's all we can spare. Lone Timber looked at him. Surprise first. Then something closer to respect. He wet the old man's cracked lips, careful, patient. Grey Feather coughed. Breathed. The rigid line of his body eased, just barely, just enough. It wasn't the most beautiful sound Cole had ever heard. But it was close. The shadow, Lone Timber said. Cole turned. The stone eagle threw its shadow dead east now. A dark blade laid flat across the bright sand, sharp-edged, certain. It was time. He started counting steps, from the base of the rock, following that line like it was the only rope keeping him from falling off the edge of something. 10. 20. 30. His heart slammed harder with every count. 40. 50. He stopped. Sand. Scattered rock. Nothing. Nothing. A murmur went through the crowd behind him. Low. Ugly. The particular sound of hope curdling into something worse than it had been, before hope showed up at all. Fast Current laughed. Short. Bitter. Started walking toward Cole, with intent plain on his face. I told him, he said, in English rougher than his uncle's, but understood clear enough. I told all of them. Wait, Cole said. Wait for what? For more of us to fall down. Wait. Fast Current stopped an arm's length away. Give me one reason. Because I'm not done yet. You look done to me. Cole didn't answer that. Couldn't honestly, because some part of him agreed. His mind raced, jagged, chasing its own tail. Because Ezra never lied. Not about this. Not about anything that ever mattered, not once in 28 years. Except what if this was the one time? What if a boy's memory had polished an old man's tall tale into something it never was? Until it wasn't a memory at all anymore. Just a wish wearing a memory's clothes. And so what if he'd killed them? Not with a bullet. With hope. Which was somehow worse, because a bullet was quick, and hope let a person keep walking, keep believing, right up until the walking stopped mattering. Which meant he had maybe 1 minute left, before this whole thing came apart in front of 40 pairs of eyes, that had trusted him, because he'd asked them to. So he shoved the thought down. Hard. Because there wasn't room for it. Not now. Not with Grey Feather's breath still ragged behind him, and the sun still climbing like it had all the time in the world, and he had none of it left to spend on doubting himself. Think, Cole. Think like Ezra taught you. Not like a scared man. Like a scout. He looked up at the sun. At the shadow. At the angle of it against the rock face, and something in the back of his mind, something that had been scratching at him, since he first counted those 50 steps, finally broke loose. He wasn't counting from the wrong spot. He was counting at the wrong moment. His grandfather hadn't learned this the way Cole had always pictured it, as a boy, some romantic old story whispered by firelight, and nothing more. Ezra Ashford learned to read shadows like this riding scout for army patrols and wagon trains, decades back, alongside men, white, Mexican, Apache, hadn't mattered to Ezra which, who needed a way to mark a cache of supplies that only the right eyes, at exactly the right hour, could ever find again. Noon wasn't a single instant. Noon was a window. A narrow one. And a man, who wanted to hide water, from anyone except the one soul meant to find it wouldn't make it easy. Wouldn't let the shadow line up true on the very first breath. He'd make you wait. He'd make you earn the last few minutes of it, same as everything else worth having in this life. Cole's pulse hammered. He held his ground. Watched the shadow keep narrowing, tightening, like a hand slowly closing into a fist. Wait, he said again. To no one. To everyone. Just wait. Fast Current stopped 3 strides off. Confused now, more than furious, which was at least something to work with. The shadows shifted. Degrees only. Nothing a careless eye would ever have caught. But Cole wasn't a careless eye. The war, and the hard years since, had scraped every ounce of carelessness clean out of him a long time ago. There. He pointed. A spot maybe 10 feet off, from where he first stopped counting. There. He dropped to his knees. Began clearing sand with bare hands. Because he'd come this far, and there wasn't a version of this, where he stood up, and walked away, from the digging now. Not with Gray Feather's ragged breath still hanging in the air behind him. Not with 40 lives measuring out the last of their patience in silence. His fingers hit something. Stone. But wrong. Too even. Too deliberate. Worked stone. Shaped by hands, not by wind, or water or time. Help me! Lone Timber was there in an instant. Then 2 more men. Then Fast Current himself, curiosity finally winning out over hostility, dropped to his knees in the sand beside the man he'd sworn to hate an hour ago. They dug like it was the only work left in the whole world. Stones so heavy it took 3 men lifting together just to shift one. Sand packed hard by however many years had passed since anyone's hands had touched this place on purpose. Nobody spoke. There wasn't breath to spare for it, and there wasn't need. Then the last stone gave. A sound rose up from beneath it. Low. Bubbling. Like the ground itself had been holding something back, so long it finally let out a breath of its own, after all that waiting. Water. Not a fountain. Not some grand geyser out of a storybook. Just a slow, steady, endless welling up of water clear, as glass, filling the space between the rocks, spreading, gathering into a small dark pool that caught the white sky and threw it back at all of them. Silence. Total. The whole desert seemed to hold it for one long second. Then it broke. People surged forward. Some crying. Some laughing in that broken, hysterical way relief sounds, when it arrives too late to feel like joy, and too early to feel like anything else yet. The young helped the old kneel at the edge, without falling in. Cole stepped back. Let them go first. Sat down hard on a rock, legs shaking under him now that there was finally room to feel how much this had cost him. He'd done it. Ezra Ashford hadn't lied. Not about this. Not about anything, it turned out, that had ever really mattered. Lone Timber came to him. Face still dripping, breath still uneven. Said nothing. Just set a hand on Cole's shoulder, and pressed down, once, hard, and that gesture said more than any speech could have managed. Even Fast Current watched, from a few feet off. Different now. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the pure hard hostility had drained out of him, and left something more complicated standing in its place. You were wrong, Fast Current said. Quiet. Almost like it cost him to admit it. About what? About the spot. A pause. You were right about everything else. Cole let himself smile. Just barely. Just for a second. 40 lives. Not a bad day's work, for a man who'd only meant to ride through on his way to somewhere else. An old woman came to him, before the light failed completely. Pressed both his hands between hers, said something long and warm in Apache that he couldn't follow a word of, and didn't need to. Her eyes said the whole of it plainly enough. A man missing 2 fingers on his left hand brought him a strip of dried meat, insisted, wordless, until Cole took it. Another simply touched his shoulder in passing, the way you'd touch something to confirm it was real, and not a trick of the heat. Cole hadn't expected any of it. Hadn't done any of it for thanks. But he found he didn't mind receiving it either, and that surprised him more than the gratitude itself did. That night they built the first real fire, since the desert had taken hold of them. Small, careful with the wood they had, but a fire all the same, and around it the camp did what camps have always done, since the first humans learned to survive together. They told stories. Lone Timber told one about a hunt, from 30 years back, and the whole circle laughed at the parts that were clearly exaggerated, and nobody minded the exaggeration one bit. Gray Feather told a longer one, slower, about a winter, so hard the elders back then had to choose who ate and who didn't, and the fire went quiet for that one, the good kind of quiet that comes from a story landing exactly where it was meant to land. Cole didn't understand most of the words. Didn't need to. A story is a shape, before it's anything else, and he could follow the shape well enough: rise, danger, cost, survival, the same shape every story worth telling has always taken, in every language men and women have ever used to keep from forgetting who they are. He thought, watching the firelight move across 40 tired, grateful faces, that he hadn't sat in a circle like this since before the war. Hadn't let himself. It felt like something he'd forgotten he was allowed to want. Rachel would have liked this, he thought, and then caught himself, surprised the thought had arrived, so gently instead of the way it usually did, like a blow he had to brace against. Maybe grief softened eventually, the way a stone in a river softens, not because the water stops moving, but because it never does. Maybe that was simply what healing looked like, when a man finally let it catch up to him instead of outrunning it town to town, job to job forever. He didn't have an answer for that. Didn't need one, not tonight. He just sat there, let the fire warm his hands, and let himself belong to something for a while. But he didn't know yet. This was only the beginning. 3 days passed at the spring. And in 3 days the camp had come back to life in a way that caught Cole off guard every time he noticed it. Which was often, because there wasn't much else to do out here besides notice things. Women moved between tents set in a wide half-circle around the water, laughing sometimes, low, easy, a sound that hadn't existed here 3 days ago, and now seemed to belong to the place completely. Elders sat in whatever shade they could find, color back in their faces, trading stories the way old people do everywhere, about better years, better places, better luck. Gray Feather was one of them now. Sitting upright, sipping slow from a clay bowl, watching the camp, with eyes that had gone clear again. On the first morning, the old man called Cole over. Patted the ground beside him, an invitation that wasn't really a question. Cole sat. "You gave your water," Gray Feather said. Slow. His English worse than Lone Timber's, but the words landed careful, chosen with effort. "To me. Stranger to me. Anybody would have." "No." Gray Feather shook his head, firm. "Not anybody. I have lived long time. I know difference." He set a hand briefly on Cole's forearm, dry and light as paper. "I do not forget this. Whatever comes. I do not forget." Cole didn't quite know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just nodded, and let the old man's gratitude sit between them the way gratitude sits, when it's earnest, and a little embarrassing for both parties involved. "You understand," Gray Feather went on, after a while, "what a thing like this means, among us. A life given for a life. Reckon I don't. Not fully. It is not a small word. Debt." The old man's eyes, still a little glassy, from the ordeal, found Cole's and held them steady. "Among my people, it is sacred. It must be answered. Not with thanks alone. With something of equal weight." I didn't do it looking for payment. I know this. Gray Feather almost smiled. That is precisely why it will be offered anyway. Honor does not ask whether the giver wanted it, only whether the debt exists. Cole let that sit a moment, uneasy without quite knowing why yet. Sounds like a heavy thing to hang on a man who just wanted to help. Heavy things are the only kind worth calling honor. Gray Feather patted his arm once more, final, and looked back out at the water. You will understand better soon enough. For now, rest. You have earned it, if any man ever has. Cole didn't press further. Filed it away instead, the same careful way he'd filed away the survey stakes, and the scouted riders, one more shape in the dark he couldn't quite make out yet, but knew, somehow, he'd be seeing clearer before long. He would think of that moment again, later, in circumstances either of them could yet imagine. For now it was just an old man's thanks, offered plain and meant entirely. That first night at the spring, Cole dreamed of Rachel for the first time in months. Not a nightmare. Worse in its way. A gentle dream. She was standing at the gate again, same as the morning he'd ridden east, except in the dream she didn't say come back whole. She just looked at him, steady, unhurried, the way she used to look at him, when she already knew something he hadn't figured out yet. You stayed this time, she seemed to say. Without saying it at all. He woke before dawn, with his chest tight, and his eyes stinging in a way he refused, flatly, to acknowledge as anything other than trail dust. Lay there alone, while looking up at stars going pale at the edges. Because maybe this was what staying looked like, when a man finally let himself do it. Maybe he'd spent this past year riding, from town to town, job to job, always moving, always somewhere new to be, precisely so he'd never have to test whether he still knew how to stay anywhere at all. And maybe, the thought arrived uninvited, unwelcome, and he let it sit there anyway, because fighting it seemed like more trouble than it was worth. Maybe Rachel wouldn't have wanted him running forever either. He got up. Checked on Duke. Didn't go back to sleep. Cole had meant to leave on the second day. His job was done after all. Whitfield's ranch was waiting. A wage. A bunk. The kind of small, quiet life he'd been building for himself, piece by careful piece, ever since the war took the other one clean away from him and left him no choice but to start over from nothing. But something held him. Maybe it was the way people looked at him now, when he walked past. Not fear. Not suspicion. Something closer to gratitude, worn quiet and careful, like they weren't sure, yet if it was safe to feel it out loud. Or maybe it was simpler than that. For the first time in longer than he wanted to count, he didn't feel like a man wandering, with no particular place to land. He told himself he'd leave in the morning. He told himself that the next morning too. That same second afternoon, fast current found him sharpening a knife against a flat stone near the water's edge, and sat down across from him without invitation, the way his uncle had done that first night. Show me, Fast Current said. Nodded at the blade. Cole raised an eyebrow. You don't know how to sharpen a knife. I know how. Not like that. He nodded again, more pointed this time. Soldier's way. Show me. So Cole showed him. The angle, the pressure, the sound a blade makes, when it's finally right against stone, and Fast Current watched close, tried it himself, frowned, tried again. Better, Cole admitted, after the third try. Your turn, Fast Current said. Pulled a second knife from his belt, offered the handle first, a gesture Cole understood, without needing it explained. Apache way. Different stone. Different angle. They traded the afternoon like that. Not quite friendship yet. But something with its foundation laid, brick by careful brick, the way trust generally gets built between two men too proud to call it by its name just yet. That same second morning, before the knives, and before Willow Song's bowl of stew, Fast Current had asked Cole to come along on a hunt. Not asked, exactly. More announced, the way a man announces something he's already decided, and is only extending the courtesy of informing you about. Camp needs meat. Fast Current said. You ride well enough. Come. They rode out, before the heat climbed too high to make the effort worthwhile, following a dry wash that cut southeast through country scrubbed bare by drought. Fast Current moved through it like he'd been born reading it, which, Cole supposed, he probably had been. There, Fast Current said eventually, reining in, pointing to a scatter of tracks pressed into softer ground near a stand of mesquite. Deer. Small group. Moved through this morning. How can you tell it was this morning? Ants. Fast Current nodded at the droppings nearby, working already. Give it another hour, nothing left of that but dust. This morning. Not before. Cole filed that away, the same careful way he filed away most things worth remembering. They tracked the herd another mile, before Fast Current raised a closed fist, stopping them both dead. Ahead, in a shallow draw, 3 does grazed what little green there was to be found, unaware, ears loose, at ease. Yours, Fast Current whispered, nodding at Cole's rifle. Prove you are more than lucky, with shadows and rocks. Cole almost laughed at that, low, careful not to spook the herd. Raised the rifle slow. Breathed out. Fired once. Clean. The lead doe dropped, where she stood, and the other 2 scattered fast, into the brush, gone before the shot had finished echoing off the draw's rock walls. Fast Current whistled low, something almost like respect breaking through his usual guardedness. One shot. Had practice. The war. The war. Cole lowered the rifle, exhaled slow. Didn't much care for that kind of practice, if I'm honest with you. Rather it had been deer the whole time. Deer do not shoot back. That's exactly my point. Then you are a strange kind of soldier. Fast Current almost smiled. Almost. Afraid of the thing you were trained for. Not afraid of it. Just tired of it. There is a difference? Ask me again when you're my age. You are not so much older than me. Feels older some days. Cole slung the rifle back, over his shoulder. You planning on helping carry this deer? Or just planning on talking me to death instead? Fast Current huffed something close to a laugh, first one Cole had heard out of him. Careful, Cowboy. I could still leave you out here. Accidents happen in this country. They surely do. Cole hefted his side of the doe. Try it, and see how fast I outrun a man still recovering from a 2-day thirst. I would outrun you regardless. Care to wager on that? I do not gamble with a man who finds water out of thin air. Bad odds. That one actually pulled a laugh out of Cole, short, real, surprising them both a little. They worked together field dressing the animal, quick, practiced, either man needing much instruction from the other. It was while they worked that Fast Current went suddenly still, head lifted, listening. What? Cole said. Nothing. A pause too long to mean nothing. Thought I heard something. Metal on metal. Far off. He shook his head, after a moment dismissing it, though Cole noticed he kept glancing back the way the sound might have come, from the rest of the ride home. They didn't speak of it again that day. But Cole marked it anyway, filed it beside the survey stakes, and the scouted tracks. Another small stone dropped quietly into a pool that was slowly, steadily, filling up with reasons to worry. Riding back with the doe slung across Fast Current's saddle, the younger man broke the silence first. My uncle says you fought for something bigger than yourself once, Fast Current said, not looking up from the trail ahead. The wagon people. Cole's jaw tightened, just slightly. Didn't know that story had traveled this far already. Words travel faster than water out here. A pause. Almost a smile, though Fast Current seemed determined not to let it fully arrive. It is why I did not trust you at first. Men who help strangers for nothing usually want something later. And now? Fast Current considered that a long moment. Now I think maybe you are only foolish. In a useful way. Cole laughed, short and real, the first time he'd let himself do that and longer than he could easily count. On the second evening, Willow's song brought him a bowl of something warm, without being asked. You should eat, she said. English careful, deliberate, clearly practiced on purpose rather than picked up by accident. You gave away all your water. Somebody should feed you back. Cole took the bowl. Much obliged. Willow's song, she said before he could ask. My name. Cole. I know. A small, careful, not quite smile. Everyone knows your name now. She sat a respectful distance off. Looked out at the water instead of at him, which he appreciated more than he let on. Fast current taught you English, Cole said. Not a question exactly. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp for half a second, then away again. Missionaries taught him. He taught me. A pause. He says knowing another people's words makes you harder to lie to. Smart man. He is. Something in the way she said it, quiet, certain, protective, told Cole plenty he didn't need spelled out any further. He didn't push. Wasn't his business, and he had troubles enough of his own, without borrowing somebody else's. She lingered a moment longer than he expected, turning her bowl over in her hands, and Cole got the sense there was more sitting behind her eyes than she'd decided yet whether to say out loud. Being a chief's daughter, she said finally, careful, like she was testing whether the words were safe to release into open air. People believe it means something soft. Being cared for. Being chosen for. She shook her head slow. It means being spent first. Whenever something needs paying for. Cole didn't answer right away. Something in the way she said it settled uneasy in his chest, though he couldn't yet name why. Spend how? He asked. You will see, maybe. She stood, smoothed her skirt, the careful not quite smile returning to close the subject, as deliberately as she'd opened it. Or maybe you will already be gone by then. That would be simpler. For everyone. She left before he could ask anything further. Cole sat along, while after turning her words over the same careful way he turned over the survey stake, sensing weight in them he didn't yet have the shape of. Later that same night, walking Duke down to water him a last time, before turning in, Cole passed close enough to the far side of the pool to see two figures sitting together in the dark, heads bent close, voices too low to carry. Fast current. Willow's song. Cole didn't linger. Didn't need to see more than that to understand the shape of something that had clearly been growing a long time, before he ever rode into this desert. He thought of Rachel, briefly, sharply, the way that particular kind of closeness could still catch him sideways, when he wasn't braced for it. He led Duke on without a sound. Some things, a man leaves alone on principle. Earlier that same second day, restless, unable to sit still, with his own thoughts for too long, Cole had walked out past the ridge alone, while the camp slept off the worst of the afternoon heat. He hadn't gone looking for anything in particular. Just walking, the way a man walks, when his own head gets too loud to sit still inside of. That was when he found the first stake. Driven deep into hard ground, a strip of red cloth tied at its top, fluttering weak in wind, that barely existed. He crouched. Turned it over in his hands. Fresh cut wood, sharpened on one end, the kind of stake a surveyor drives to mark a boundary line, before anybody's bothered asking the people already living inside that boundary whether they agreed to it. He found a second stake 40 yards on. Then a third, further still, all in a line, all pointed the same direction, straight through the heart of the very ground the camp now called home. Somebody had been out here recently. Days, maybe less. Somebody with tools, with time, with the confident, unhurried patience of men who don't expect to be interrupted. Cole stood there a long while, turning that stake over in his hands, feeling something cold settle deeper into his chest than the desert heat could ever hope to burn back out. This wasn't soldiers driving people off land out of simple cruelty. This was somebody planning to build something on this exact ground. And the wells poisoned behind them weren't punishment. They were clearing the way. He pocketed the stake. Didn't mention it to anyone that evening, didn't see the use in scaring a camp that had only just started breathing easy again. but he carried the weight of it with him the rest of that day, and the next, the way you carry a stone in your boot. You haven't found the moment yet to stop and shake loose. On the third evening, checking Duke's shoes by the last orange light, Cole noticed something that made the hair on his arms stand up before his mind caught up to why. Tracks off past the ridge line, half a mile out, easy to miss, unless a man had spent a hard year learning exactly what a shod horse leaves behind in soft ground compared to what an unshod one leaves. Shod horses. Several. Moving in a pattern too careful, too quiet, to belong to anybody just passing through. He found Fast Current near the horses, and said nothing, just tilted his head toward the ridge. Fast Current read the gesture immediately, the way a man reads whether he's been watching for all his life. They went together. On foot, low, quiet, the two of them moving in a silence that neither one had to negotiate. It simply happened, natural as breathing, two men who learned the same lessons from different teachers. At the ridge line, they went flat against the rock and looked down. 3 riders. Distant, but not distant enough. Rifles across their saddles. One held field glasses, sweeping slow across the camp below, lingering, counting. They are looking at the water, Fast Current whispered. Not at us. Same thing, where they're concerned. The riders lingered another minute. Then turned, unhurried, and rode off north, the way men ride, when they already know they'll be coming back, and see no reason to rush the first look. Fast Current watched them go, jaw tight. You know these men? No. Cole kept his eyes on the ridge a moment longer, just to be sure. But I know the kind. Same kind that poisoned your wells, I'd wager. Somebody scouting ahead of something bigger. Bigger how? Don't know yet. Cole exhaled slow. But men don't ride careful like that over nothing. There's a plan behind it. There's always a plan behind it. They climbed back down together, and Cole found Lone Timber near his own fire, and told him plain what they'd seen. Lone Timber's face didn't change much. Just went very still, the way a man's face goes still, when he's already halfway expecting bad news, and it finally arrives on schedule. Same men, he said. Who poisoned the wells? Maybe worse. Cole crouched beside the fire. Found stakes out past the ridge 2 days back. Survey markers. Somebody's mapping this ground for something. For what? Don't know yet. Cole looked at the flames a long moment. But men don't drive families from wells like that over nothing. There's money in it somewhere. There's always money in it. Lone Timber was quiet a while. Then, you could still leave, Cole Ashford. Ride to your ranch. Nobody would think less of you for it. Cole thought about that. About Whitfield's spread, the wage, the bunk, the small quiet life waiting on him, same as it had been waiting for weeks now. No, he said finally. Reckon I couldn't. Lone Timber studied him a moment. Then nodded slow, the same way he nodded that first afternoon at the water's edge, not quite trust yet. Just its beginning, grown a little further along now than it had been 3 days before. Word of the riders spread through camp fast, the way bad news always does, faster even than the good kind had. By full dark, the council had gathered near the largest fire, Lone Timber, Gray Feather, 2 other elders Cole hadn't yet learned the names of, Fast Current standing just behind his uncle's shoulder like a shadow that had decided to grow opinions of its own. We cannot run again, one of the elders said, flat, final. We have no strength left for running. Then we do not run, Lone Timber said. We hold this water. We hold this ground. With what? The same elder pressed. Warriors half-starved. Old ones who can barely stand. Gray Feather spoke then, voice thin but steady. With time. Time to grow strong again. Time the stranger has already bought us once. His eyes found Cole's across the fire. Perhaps he buys us more of it yet. Every face turned toward Cole at that. Waiting. He hadn't expected to be asked. Hadn't rehearsed an answer for it, and found, when he opened his mouth, That the truth was the only thing that came out anyway. "I don't know what's coming," he said. "Don't know when, don't know how many. But I know men who scout that quiet don't scout for nothing, and I know whatever they're building toward, it isn't finished yet. That buys you time. Maybe not much, but some. And you." Lone Timber's eyes didn't leave his. "What do you do with that time?" Cole thought of Whitfield's ranch. Thought of the wage, the bunk, the quiet life waiting on him, patient as it had been patient for a week now. Thought of Rachel at the gate. Thought of a wagon train he hadn't been able to walk away from either. "Reckon I stay," he said. "For now. Long as it's useful." Fast Current's expression didn't soften exactly. But something in it shifted, settled, the way a scale settles once enough weight has finally landed on the honest side of it. The council went quiet a while after that. Not an uneasy quiet. The other kind, the kind that comes when a hard thing has been said plainly, and everyone in hearing of it understands there's no unsaying it now. Cole stood there a long moment, looking out at the dark ridge, where the riders had vanished. Some fights find a man whether he goes looking for them or not. And some, a man chooses to stay and meet, even when every practical bone in his body is telling him to ride the other direction, as fast as the horse will carry him. He banked the fire low. Looked out one more time at that empty ridge. Later, alone, he took the folded letter from his saddlebag. Whitfield's letter. Foreman's work, decent wage, a bunkhouse roof, that didn't leak. He read it once more by firelight, the way he'd read it a dozen times already on the ride out here. Then he folded it back up, careful, and tucked it away, without deciding, yet, whether he'd ever send word explaining the delay, or whether some decisions simply announced themselves through the not doing of the thing you'd always meant to do. Whoever was out there, they'd be back. And when they came, they wouldn't be riding in slow. The council fire burned low the next morning, but nobody had slept much regardless. Word had gone, through camp overnight the way water goes, through sand, quiet, fast, impossible to stop once it started moving. The riders on the ridge. The stakes. Whatever was coming. Cole had spent most of the dark hours awake himself, turning over the survey stakes in his mind, turning over everything Lone Timber had confessed by the fire, turning over a dozen half-formed plans for defense, that all collapsed the moment he tried to picture 40 tired people holding a line against riflemen. He'd expected the morning to bring talk of exactly that. Positions. Watches. Who carried a rifle, and who carried a knife, and who could only carry water to the ones who needed it most. He hadn't expected what actually came instead. The whole camp had gathered, before he'd even finished saddling Duke for a look at the ridge. Women in their best clothing, the kind saved for occasions a person didn't get many chances to mark out here. Elders seated in a careful row, faces arranged into the particular solemnity old people reserve for moments they considered genuinely important. Even the children, except there were none, not among these people, not anymore, the war and the marches having long since stripped this camp down to only those old enough to survive what younger bodies couldn't. Even the youngest warriors stood straighter than usual, sensing ceremony in the air, before anyone explained what kind. Lone Timber stood at the center, dressed formal now in a way Cole hadn't seen him dressed before, beaded, deliberate, a man putting on the weight of his office along with his clothes. Gray Feather sat near him, composed, dignified, nothing yet betraying the secret Cole didn't know he was carrying. Two other elders flanked them both, a broad-shouldered man named Iron Bluff, who'd said little to Cole, so far but watched everything, with sharp, assessing eyes, and a thin, sharp-voiced woman named Quiet Rain, easily the oldest person Cole had yet seen among them, who commanded a respect, from the younger warriors, that seemed to require no raised voice at all to enforce. And behind them, along one whole side of the clearing, a line had formed. Women. Young. Dressed in their finest, what little finery 3 weeks of forced marching had left them. Cole counted without meaning to, the way a man counts anything that lines up in front of him expecting a decision. 22. His stomach dropped, before his mind finished catching up to why. Because this wasn't a debt. Not really. Not in any language he understood the word in. Because a debt got settled, with coin, with labor, with something a man could hand over and walk away lighter for having given. This was different. This was people. Which meant there wasn't a version of accepting it that didn't turn him into exactly the kind of man he'd spent this past year riding away from becoming. Until he reminded himself, hard, that these women hadn't chosen this either. That refusing carelessly could shame them same as accepting carelessly would trap them. Which meant there wasn't an easy door out of this room. Only a harder one somewhere that he hadn't found the shape of yet. So he made himself breathe. Slow. Counted it the way he used to count breaths, before a fight, back when counting was the only thing keeping his hands steady enough to be useful. And then he looked down the line of faces in front of him, and forced himself to actually see them, one at a time, instead of simply seeing the number. Cole Ashford. Lone Timber's voice carried the whole clearing, formal, ceremonial, nothing like the tired confession he'd offered by the fire 2 nights before. You have saved my people. 40 lives that should have ended in sand. This is not a small thing. Cole shifted his weight, uncomfortable already, sensing where this was headed before he had proof of it. Anybody would have done the same. No. Iron, bluff, sharp, final. Not anybody. Many would have ridden past. You gave your last water to a dying man, without asking what it would cost you. In our way, Lone Timber went on, a debt like this is sacred. It cannot go unanswered. The honor of my people demands we offer you something equal to what you have given. He raised a hand. The line of women stepped forward as one. These are the unmarried women of our people, Lone Timber said. Daughters. Nieces. Cousins. Each has agreed to this honor. I offer them all to you. They will be your wives. They will care for your home, give you strong children. All of them. Yours. Silence. Total. The kind that rings louder than any noise could have. Cole looked down the line. Some faces curious. Some shy. A few even managing something close to a smile. Except one. She stood near the end. Tall. Turquoise stone at her throat, dust gone now, catching the morning light instead. She did not smile. She looked at him instead, with an intensity that made him feel, for one uncomfortable second, like she could see straight through to whatever he was actually thinking. My daughter, Lone Timber said, following the direction of Cole's gaze. Willow's song. The most valued of all. She too is yours. If you wish it. Cole felt the air in the clearing go thick. Heavy. Like something pressing down, that had nothing to do with heat. 22 wives. The number alone was absurd. Unthinkable. How does a man refuse a gift like that without gutting an entire tribe's sense of honor in the process? And how does he accept it, when accepting it means becoming exactly the kind of man he'd spent this past year trying not to become, one who takes, because taking was offered, without asking whether taking was right? Then he noticed Fast Current. Standing rigid at the edge of the gathering. Fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone pale under the desert sun. His eyes weren't on Cole. They were on Willow's song. And in those eyes was something Cole recognized immediately, because he'd worn that exact expression himself once, standing at a gate, watching somebody he loved. Love. Mixed with something closer to grief. Everything clicked into place at once. Some of the elders murmured approval at the generosity of the gift. Others watched Cole, waiting, curious how a stranger would answer an honor this size. The women stayed silent. But their eyes carried whole conversations Cole couldn't fully read, some hopeful, some resigned, one, at the very end of the line, quietly pleading. Great Chief. Cole chose his words slow, careful, like a man crossing broken glass barefoot. This honor is more than I know how to properly answer. Lone Timber waited. But I have to be honest with you. Cole kept his voice steady, though nothing inside him felt steady at all. Where I come from, a man takes one wife. And that choice comes from something more than gratitude. Or duty. A murmur ran through the council. One elder frowned, deep, offended. You reject our gift, the elder said. You find our daughters unworthy. That's not it. Not even close. Cole shook his head, firm. Every one of these women would honor any man lucky enough to have her. This isn't about worth. Then what is it about? Cole didn't have a clean answer for that. Not one that wouldn't cost somebody something, no matter how carefully he phrased it. I need time, he said finally. This isn't a decision a man makes standing in the sun, with an audience watching. Lone Timber exchanged a long look with the elders. Voices, low, quick, and Apache Cole couldn't follow. Finally the chief nodded. Until sunrise, he said. But understand, Cole Ashford. This debt must be paid. If you will not take our women, you must offer another way to answer it. Honor demands it. The women were dismissed. Filed out quiet, careful, the way people move when they're not sure whether they've just been rejected or spared. Willow's song was last. At the edge of the clearing, she stopped. Turned. Looked at him one final time. Her lips moved. No sound behind it. Just shape. Please. No. Then she was gone. Cole stood there a long moment, after she disappeared, the shape of those two silent words sitting heavier in his chest than the whole ceremony that had preceded them. Because a woman didn't beg like that, silent, careful, unwilling even to risk the sound of her own voice, unless she'd learned somewhere along the way that begging out loud had never once bought her anything worth the risk of it. Which told him plenty about what kind of world had shaped her, long before he'd ever ridden into it. Which told him, too, exactly what kind of answer he owed her, whatever it cost him to give it. Fast Current caught him, before he'd gone 20 feet from the clearing. Grabbed his arm, hard enough to leave a mark, hard enough that Cole understood exactly how much restraint the grip itself represented. If you touch her, Fast Current said. Voice low. Voice like something breaking very slowly, and very deliberately. If you take her from me, I swear it on every spirit that's ever watched this land. I'm not going to, Cole said. Fast Current's grip didn't loosen. I mean it, Cole said again. But we need to talk. You and I. Now. They stood there a long moment, two men under a desert sky neither of them had asked to be tested by, tension between them thick enough to cut, but also, for the first time, something else underneath it. Something almost like the beginning of an understanding. They walked to the edge of camp, where the firelight barely reached anymore. Stars overhead, thousands of them, more than any single sky had a right to hold. Night wind, finally cool, dragging the day's heat off the sand at last. Your English is good, Cole said. Broke the silence first, mostly because somebody had to. Missionaries. Fast Current's voice carried something bitter buried deep. Before they drove us off our land. Taught me their words. Thought it would make me forget who I was. Did it? No. A flicker, almost a smile, gone as fast as it came. It didn't. They sat, keeping a careful distance from each other the way two men do, when neither is sure yet whether this conversation ends in alliance or in blood. I have watched you 3 days now, Fast Current said, after a while, voice rougher than before. I wanted you gone the first hour. Wanted it still, some hours since. But a man who gives his last water to a stranger's dying elder does not do that to buy 22 wives cheap. I know this now. Whatever else I do not know. Obliged for that, at least. Do not thank me yet. I have not decided whether to help you, or simply watch you fail. Fair enough. Cole let a silence sit a moment, the kind that invites rather than avoids. Tell me about her. If you're willing. Fast Current's jaw worked once, before the words came. Willow's song and I have been promised since we were children, he said finally. voice tight with something he clearly hadn't practiced saying out loud before. When she was 10. I was 12. Our families agreed. We've waited. Prepared for the day we would finally belong to each other. I have loved her longer than I can properly remember not loving her. Does she love you? With every breath she takes. His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough. As I love her. But my uncle's honor is stronger than my heart. If he has given his word, I cannot challenge him openly. Not without shaming my whole family. Shaming her, most of all. That's a heavy weight to carry quiet. It is the only weight I have ever known how to carry. Fast Current's eyes, when they finally met Cole's, held something raw underneath the usual guardedness. You understand something of this yourself, I think. Carrying a thing quiet, because there is no acceptable way to set it down. Cole didn't answer that directly. Didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Cole studied the younger man a long moment. Watched the war going on behind his eyes. Love against duty, wanting against owing, the same battle no man anywhere should ever have to fight, and somehow every man eventually does. I won't take her, Cole said. Firm. Her or any of the others. It isn't right. Fast Current looked at him. Surprise first. Then something close to hope, careful, unwilling to fully arrive, yet in case it got proven wrong. You mean this completely? I do. There is a problem. Fast Current's jaw tightened. My uncle says honor demands payment. If you reject the women, you must offer something else instead. What else is there? Fast Current was quiet a moment, thinking. In our way. There is another path. If a man rejects the gift of honor, he may prove his worth through trials instead. Pass them, and you earn the right to name your own solution to the debt. And if I fail? Fast Current didn't finish that sentence. Didn't need to. You'd help me with this, Cole said. Why? 3 days ago you wanted me dead. Fast Current was silent a long moment. Because I watched what you did, he said finally. You gave your last water to a dying man. When we found the spring, you drank last, after everyone else had their fill. Those are not the actions of a bad man. A pause. And because if you help me keep her, I will owe you a debt of my own. Cole extended his hand. Then we have a deal. Fast Current looked at the offered hand a moment. Then took it. Firm. A deal. Morning came fast, the way it always did out here, no gentle gray warning, just dark and then suddenly not. Cole had spent the night turning the whole impossible shape of it over in his mind, same as he turned over trail sign, same as he turned over a shadow that refused to line up true on the first breath. Because there wasn't a version of this, where he simply took what was offered and rode on peaceful, pretending the taking cost nothing. Until he reminded himself that refusing outright, without offering something in its place, would cost these people something too, their honor, their sense that a debt this size could ever be properly closed. Which meant the only path through was the harder one Fast Current had shown him. Earn the right to answer the debt on his own terms, instead of simply rejecting the terms already offered. He checked on Duke one final time, before the council gathered, running a hand down the gelding's neck, the animal leaning into the touch the unhurried way horses do, when they trust the hand doing the touching. Wish you could talk me through this one, Cole murmured. Reckon you'd tell me the same thing regardless. Steady on. One step at a time. Don't spook at what you can't yet see clear. Duke huffed, unbothered, and Cole allowed himself a short, tired laugh before turning toward the gathering crowd. Cole stood before the council again. Lone Timber and the elders gathered, faces serious, expectant. The 22 women present too, seated in a wide half-circle. Willow's song kept her eyes lowered, but Cole noticed her hands trembling slightly, where they rested in her lap. I've made my decision, Cole announced. With all respect to these honorable women, I cannot accept them as wives. Not because they're unworthy, but because my heart can't be honestly divided among so many. It would be dishonest to try. A murmur of surprise ran through the gathering. One elder stood, clearly offended. So you reject our most precious gift? You insult our daughters. I insult no one. Cole kept his voice level. But I ask the ancient right of trials. Let me prove my worth another way. I will propose a different solution to this debt. The right of trials has not been invoked in this camp in a generation. Iron Bluff said, skeptical, studying Cole with open suspicion. It exists to test whether an outsider truly understands what he asks to be part of. Not as an easy road around an honor he finds inconvenient. I don't find it inconvenient, Cole said. I find it too large a debt to answer honestly, with anything less than everything I've got to offer instead. That's what I mean to prove. Lone Timber leaned forward, studying him. You know our customs. Fast Current has instructed me, Cole said, noting the ripple of surprise that moved through several faces at hearing this. Lone Timber looked to his nephew, who nodded once. Something passed between uncle and nephew that Cole couldn't fully interpret, and didn't try to. The council conferred while longer, voices low, urgent, 3 separate arguments happening at once in a language Cole couldn't follow, but could read plainly enough in the shifting expressions around the fire. Grey Feather, notably, said little, watching the proceedings. With an unreadable stillness Cole would understand the true weight of only days later. Very well, Lone Timber said finally. We will give you 3 trials. The first, a horse race to the Twin Rocks and back. The second, you will clear the false ground the outsiders have hidden in our valley, the traps meant to maim and kill, without harm coming to yourself, or to those who search beside you. The third, a combat of endurance, with our best warrior. Who is your best warrior? Cole asked, though he already suspected the answer. I am, Fast Current said, standing. Something unreadable in his eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or respect. Or the particular kind of challenge that exists only between 2 men who've already decided, privately, not to actually be enemies. 3 trials? Iron Bluff said, still unconvinced. And if he fails even one, then the debt stands as it was offered, Lone Timber said. And the women remain his to accept, or he leaves this camp, with the shame of a broken promise following him wherever he rides next. I accept all 3, Cole said. Under those terms. The council dispersed slowly, after that, the weight of what had just been agreed settling over the whole camp like a second kind of heat, less visible than the sun's, no less pressing for that. 4 days before the trials were set to begin, a scout came riding in hard, horse lathered, breath ragged, calling for Fast Current, before he'd even fully reined in. Cole followed, close behind. Found the scout describing something fast in Apache, hands moving in sharp, urgent shapes. He found a man. Fast Current translated, tight. Alone. Fallen from his horse near the eastern draw. Injured. Not one of ours. They rode out together, Cole and Fast Current, and 2 others, fast as the ground allowed, hooves throwing dust, into a sky already bleached white, with mid-morning heat. The eastern draw cut deep, and narrow between 2 rises, shadowed, the kind of place a spooked horse might bolt, through blind and pay for it badly. They found the animal first, standing riderless a distance off, favoring one leg, saddle still cinched tight. Then, further along, the man himself, crumpled against a rock, where the fall had thrown him. The man they found was mid-30s, dressed rough, a company shirt beneath his coat, with lettering half obscured by dust and blood. A broken leg, badly set, the kind of injury that happens when a horse spooks hard, and a rider goes down wrong. His face was pale, sweat-soaked despite the morning chills still clinging to the shadow draw, breath coming shallow and quick. Fast Current knelt first, checked the man for weapons, found a pistol and a knife, both set carefully aside, out of reach, but not out of sight, the particular caution of a man who'd learned not to trust a wounded stranger simply because he looked helpless. Cole knelt beside him. Checked the leg the way he checked a dozen legs in the war, professional, unhurried despite the tension crackling around him. The break was clean enough, at least, though badly set, already swelling angry beneath torn trouser fabric. "You'll live," Cole said. "If we set this right." The man groaned. Opened his eyes, focus slow, and something like fear moved across his face, when he took in the 4 riders gathered around him, 3 of them Apache, all of them watching him, with expressions that offered no particular comfort. "Please," the man managed. "I ain't armed. I ain't." "Quiet," Fast Current said. Not unkindly. "Just final." Cole worked the leg carefully, splinting it with 2 straight branches, and strips torn from his own shirt, same as he'd done for the man, with the infected wound days earlier at the spring. The stranger watched him work, confusion plain on his face, clearly having expected something considerably less gentle from the company he'd found himself in. "Why?" the man asked finally, voice thin. "Why fix it? You don't know me." "Man's leg is broken," Cole said simply. "Don't need to know him to know that needs fixing." The man's eyes caught on Cole's face then, something shifting in his expression, recognition dawning slow. "You're him. The cowboy. The one that found their water." "Might be." The man laughed, short, pained, disbelieving. "Boss is gonna want to know that real bad." Cole's hand stilled on the splint, just for a moment. "Your boss got a name." The man's eyes caught the lettering on the shirt then. Half torn, but legible enough. Crane Mining and Freight CO. Something cold moved through him. Slow, deliberate, the way recognition moves through a man, when a name finally connects to something he'd buried a long time ago on purpose. "Say that name again," Cole said quietly. To no one. To himself. They carried the injured man back to camp rather than leave him to the draw, splint holding, protests weak and unconvincing given the state he was in. Lone Timber studied him along, while once they'd arrived, weighing something Cole couldn't quite read behind the chief's steady expression. "We could hold him," Fast Current said. "Learn what he knows of Crane's plans. Or we could send him back," Lone Timber said. "Healed, and let Crane wonder what kind of enemy tends a wounded man's leg instead of leaving him to die in a ravine." Cole considered both options a moment. "Might do more good letting him go." A man treated kind by folks he expected to be savages carries that story with him whether he means to or not. Sometimes that story does more work than any information we'd have squeezed out of him staying. In the end, they kept him 3 days, fed him, let the leg set proper, and put him on his own horse pointed north once he could sit a saddle again. He didn't thank them, exactly, before he rode off. Some shames run too deep for a man to voice out loud, even when he's plainly feeling them. But he looked back once, from a good distance, and Cole caught something in that final glance that looked less like fear now than it had the day they'd found him, and more like a man reconsidering, quietly, everything he thought he'd understood about who deserved his loyalty. Whether that reconsidering would matter, in the end, against a boss like Crane, Cole couldn't say. But it cost them nothing to plant the seed. And planting seeds, his grandfather had always said, was cheap work compared to the harvest that sometimes bought a man later, when he least expected needing it. Because he knew that name. Because 2 years back, in a different desert, under a different kind of siege, a supply wagon had rolled into his unit's camp bearing crates stamped with that exact mark. Rifle cartridges. A full shipment, contracted out fast, and cheap by a company more interested in profit margins than in men's lives. He remembered that morning clearer than he wanted to. The crates stacked neat beside the quartermaster's tent. The lieutenant signing for delivery, without so much as opening a single box to check the load. Cole had been young enough then to think that carelessness was simply how supply lines worked, not yet old enough to understand that carelessness, when money was involved, was rarely an accident at all. 2 days later, his unit rode into a ravine expecting to draw covering fire the moment they engaged. Expecting rifles to answer when triggers were pulled. Half of them didn't. He remembered the sound most of all. Not the gunfire, the absence of it. The dry, useless click of a hammer falling on a cartridge that should have fired, and simply hadn't. Multiplied across a dozen men in the same terrible instant, all of them suddenly, as good as unarmed in a ravine, with nowhere to run. He remembered Private Doyle, 19 years old, going down not 10 feet from him, rifle still raised, finger still on a trigger that had failed him at the one moment it mattered most. Remembered dragging 2 other men clear, over ground that offered no cover at all, remembered the particular helpless fury of watching good soldiers die not from the enemy's skill, but from somebody else's greed, sitting safe in an office 1,000 miles from the consequences of it. 6 men didn't come home from that ravine, who should have? 6 letters written to 6 families by officers, who never once mentioned defective ordnance, because admitting it would have meant admitting somebody profitable was responsible, and profitable men rarely got named in those letters. Cole had spent 2 years since telling himself it was simply bad luck. Nobody's fault in particular. A story easier to live with than the alternative. Until now. Until a half-torn company shirt on an unconscious man's back told him otherwise. Silas Crane. The same company. The same name. Sitting now on a ledger somewhere that had already cost Cole more than this desert ever had, long before Cole ever knew to hate the man attached to it. You know this name? Fast Current said, watching him closely. I know it, Cole said. Voice flat. Controlled, the way a man's voice goes flat, and controlled right, before it stops being either. Better than I'd like to. Fast Current studied him a long moment, reading something in Cole's face that plainly troubled him. This is not only about the water for you now. No, Cole admitted. Reckon it isn't. Is that dangerous? For us. Cole thought about that honestly before answering, because the younger man deserved an honest answer more than a comfortable one. Could be, he said. A man carrying an old grudge sometimes makes worse decisions than a man carrying none at all. I'll try not to let it be that kind of dangerous. But I won't lie to you, and say it doesn't change something in me, seeing that name again. Then we watch each other. Fast Current said. For different reasons than we started with. But we watch each other regardless. Deal within a deal, Cole said. Apparently so. Lone Timber found him alone, that evening, sitting apart from the others, jaw tight, hands restless in a way they hadn't been, since the day Cole had first ridden into this desert. You carry something heavier tonight, the chief observed, settling beside him, without invitation, same as always. Man from Crane's outfit. The one we found injured. Cole stared into the middle distance a long moment before continuing. His company sold rifles to my unit once. Rifles that failed when it mattered most. Men died because of it. Men I rode beside for 2 years. Lone Timber was quiet, letting the weight of that settle before responding. And now you wish to make this man Crane pay for that, alongside everything he does to my people. Reckon I do. Cole's voice had an edge to it he didn't fully like hearing in himself. Man like that ought to answer for what he's cost people. All of it. Not just the water. I understand that wanting, Lone Timber said. I have wanted it myself, more times than I can count, against soldiers, against settlers, against every hand that has pushed my people further into ground that cannot sustain us. But I will tell you something an old chief learned slowly, at considerable cost. Vengeance and justice wear similar faces, Cole Ashford. From a distance, a man can hardly tell them apart. It is only up close, in the doing of the thing, that the difference becomes plain. What's the difference, then? To your way of thinking. Vengeance asks only that the other man suffer. Justice asks that the wrong be answered, and asks it plainly enough, that even those who caused it must recognize the truth of what they did. One leaves a man satisfied for a night. The other leaves the world slightly harder for the next Crane to do what this one has done. Lone Timber's eyes found his steady. I do not say this to cool your anger. Only to ask that you aim it somewhere useful, when the moment comes to aim it at all. Cole sat with that a long while, turning it over the same careful way he turned over everything else that mattered. Man makes that sound simple, he said finally. It is not simple. It is only clear. Those are different things as well. Lone Timber rose, joints stiff, the same weariness as ever settling into his movements. Sleep if you can. Whatever this becomes, clarity will serve you better tomorrow than rage alone ever could. He left Cole there, alone again, but somehow less weighted than before, the old chief's words settling into him slow, the way water settles eventually, into ground that has gone too long without it. A few hours' ride north, closer to the spring than the fort was in the opposite direction, Silas Crane's mining camp sat at the edge of a half-built operation. In a canvas tent there, he studied a survey map spread across a folding table, lantern light flickering across lines, and markers that meant, to anyone who understood them, exactly one thing. Money. A great deal of it. Buried underground, currently occupied by people Crane had decided, some time ago, didn't factor meaningfully into his calculations. He was a neat man. Precise in his dress even out here, collar buttoned despite the heat, hands clean despite the dust that coated everything else within 100 miles. He built this operation the same way he built everything, carefully, patiently, with a ledger's cold indifference to whatever human cost the numbers happened to require along the way. A foreman ducked into the tent. "Scout hasn't come back, Mr. Crane." "Then send another." Crane didn't look up from the map. "And another after that, if it comes to it. I want eyes on that spring until I know exactly how many are camped there, and how well they're armed. Word is a white man's with them now. Help them find the water." That got Crane's attention. He straightened, slow, something calculating moving behind his eyes. A white man. Cowboy, they're saying. Rode in alone. Some kind of a scout in the war, from the sound of it. Crane considered that a long moment. Then allowed himself a thin, humorless smile. He'd built an entire fortune on other men's wartime desperation, contracts signed fast, shipments inspected loosely, corners cut wherever cutting them cost nothing, but somebody else's blood, paid out somewhere far enough away, that the paying never troubled his sleep. It amused him, in an abstract way, that the war might now be circling back to inconvenience him personally. Well, he rolled the map closed, deliberate. Every operation needs a complication eventually. Keeps a man sharp. He set the map aside, poured himself 2 fingers of something amber, from a bottle, that had traveled considerably further than the tent around it. Find out who he is. And find out fast. I don't intend to let one wandering cowhand slow down a claim I've spent 2 years, and a great deal of money securing. And if he doesn't move... Crane's smile didn't waver. Then we move him, he said. One way or another. Men like that always think their conscience is worth more than it costs to be rid of them. I've found, in my experience, it rarely is. He drank. Looked back at the map, already unrolling it again, already calculating. How long until the road survey's finished? Week, maybe less. Assuming nothing else slows us down. Nothing else will. Crane said. See to it personally. The foreman left. Crane sat alone a while longer, lantern light catching the hard, patient lines of his face, a man for whom other people's lives had long since become simply another category of expense to be managed, minimized, and when necessary eliminated. The first trial began at noon. The whole camp gathered along the flat to watch, a rare gathering of pure anticipation, after so many recent days weighted down by fear. Children, except there were none among them, only grown women, and men young enough to remember being children once, standing now with the particular restless energy people carry, when something exciting is finally, mercifully, about to happen instead of something merely dreaded. The twin rocks rose identical on the horizon, roughly 5 miles distant, and the ground between here and there was exactly the kind of treacherous that could shred an inattentive horse's legs before the race had properly begun. Loose sand? Scattered stone? Cactus low enough to catch an ankle, high enough to catch a horse's shin, if the rider wasn't careful. Fast Current rode a pinto, young, fast, clearly bred for exactly this kind of ground, the animal already dancing sideways, with barely contained energy. Cole's Duke was older, steadier, built for endurance rather than speed, which Cole was counting on more than he let show. "Rules are simple," Lone Timber announced, voice carrying across the whole gathered flat. "Circle both rocks. Return. First across this line wins. No other restrictions." The two riders lined up, side by side, and for one long moment neither man looked at the other, both staring instead at the distant twin rocks like men measuring the exact size of the thing they'd agreed to attempt. "Nervous?" Fast Current said, "Not quite a question." "Some. Good." A man who isn't nervous before something like this has not properly understood the stakes. Wasn't planning on telling you that part. You did not need to. I could see it in how you're holding your reins. Cole glanced down at his own hands, tighter on the leather than he'd realized. Loosened them, deliberate. "Anything else you've been reading off me, while we're at it?" "Plenty. But we don't have time, before the race starts, for the whole list." Cole felt Duke's tension humming beneath him, the animal reading the excitement in the air same, as it had once read danger nobody else could see. Fast Current looked over. "May the best win." "So be it." Lone Timber's arm rose. Silence fell across the whole gathered camp, thick, expectant, the kind of quiet that seems to hold its breath along, with everyone standing in it. Then it dropped, and both horses exploded forward in a burst of sand and speed, and the crowd's held breath broke all at once into a roar that chased the two riders halfway across the flat, before fading behind them into distance and dust. Fast Current took the lead immediately. His younger horse proved its worth in the first 100 yards, pulling ahead fast, and Cole didn't chase it. Behind them, the crowd's voice rose, and fell with every length gained and lost, women calling out encouragement in words Cole couldn't follow, elders leaning forward on whatever they'd found to sit on, the whole camp briefly, gloriously united in something that wasn't fear for the first time in longer than any of them could probably remember. Not yet. Because he knew his own horse. Knew Duke had more endurance in him than speed, and this was a long race, not a sprint, and a man who spent himself too early in a long race usually finished it on his knees. They crossed the open flat. Fast Current held 3 lengths clear. Then the ground turned to scattered rock, and here pure speed mattered less than judgment, and Cole began closing the gap, Duke picking through the stones, with the confidence of an animal that had learned this exact kind of country the hard way, over years, same as its rider had. Fast Current, riding harder than the terrain wanted, had to slow twice to avoid stones that would have snapped a leg clean through. By the twin rocks, they were even. They rounded the formations almost together. Turned back. Both horses already breathing hard, lathered, the real test only just beginning. Fast Current spurred harder, trying to break the tie. Then Cole noticed something. The pinto had started favoring its left foreleg. Slight. Almost nothing. But Cole had spent long enough reading exactly this kind of almost nothing in animals that couldn't tell him themselves what was wrong. Injured. Stepped bad among the rocks. Cole could win right now. All it would take was pressing the advantage, riding past while Fast Current's horse limped through the pain. But then he remembered why he was doing any of this. It wasn't to humiliate a man who'd finally started trusting him. It was to earn something worth having, and there wasn't honor in winning off another man's bad luck. He slowed. Just slightly. Rode alongside instead of past. "What are you doing?" Fast Current shouted, over the wind, confused. "Your horse is hurt." "Not badly. Enough to manage." "Then win," Cole called back. "I don't need to win. I need to prove I'm worthy of this." They crossed the finish line together. Exactly together. The crowd erupted in confused murmuring. A tie wasn't how these trials were supposed to end. Lone Timber stood, watching both riders dismount, studying the Pinto's leg, as Fast Current inspected it himself, confirming the slight limp Cole had spotted first. "Tai," one elder said. "This complicates things." "No," Fast Current interrupted, surprising everyone gathered. "Cole wins. He saw my horse was hurt, and chose not to press his advantage. That is worth more than speed. That is honor." Lone Timber nodded slow, something like approval crossing his weathered face. "The first trial is complete," he said. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, at dawn, the second trial begins." That night, despite everything still hanging unresolved over the camp, something like celebration took hold anyway. Women sang low over the fire, the same kind of grief and prayer melodies Cole had heard on the death march days before, except lighter now, edged with something closer to hope than mourning. An older man produced a hand drum from somewhere and kept a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to settle into Cole's chest and stay there. Fast Current, still favoring the shoulder Cole had caught him with twice during the race, sat near enough to Willow Song, that propriety allowed, close enough that anything closer would have. Their eyes kept finding each other across the firelight, quick, private, the particular language two people build, when the world won't yet let them speak plainly. Cole watched it a while, content simply to be near it, without belonging to it directly, the way a man warms himself at a fire that isn't strictly his to tend. Gray Feather sat near his usual place, quieter than the rest, and Cole noticed, watching him, that the old man's eyes kept drifting toward the ridgeline every few minutes, distracted, uneasy, though nobody else seemed to remark on it. Cole filed it away, without yet understanding what it meant. One more small stone dropped into a pool that would not stay still much longer. Later that evening, Cole walked out past the horses to check on Duke's leg, worked hard by the race, and passed close enough to a stand of low rock near the water's edge to see two figures there, half hidden in shadow, standing closer together than caution alone would explain. Fast Current. Willow Song. He didn't mean to overhear. Would have turned back the moment he realized, except something in the hush of their voices held him a moment longer than good manners allowed. "You could have won today," Willow's Song was saying, quiet, urgent. "You saw his horse was hurt. Why risk everything on a tie?" "Because winning that way would have cost more than it earned," Fast Current said. "I am beginning to understand this man. He does not take advantage of another's weakness. It would shame me to be lesser than him in front of everyone I love." "I don't care about shame. I care that you come back from tomorrow's trial whole. I intend to." Intentions are not promises. A silence stretched between them, tender, aching, the kind of silence two people share, when words have become too small for what they actually mean. "I have loved you since before I understood what the word meant," Fast Current said finally, voice low enough that Cole nearly missed it entirely. "I am not prepared to lose that to my uncle's honor. Not after everything else this land has already taken from us." "Then don't," Willow's Song whispered. "Trust the cowboy. Trust yourself. I have to believe there is a version of this that ends with us still standing together, or I don't know how to keep standing at all." Cole eased back the way he'd come, quiet, unwilling to intrude further on something that plainly wasn't his to witness. But the ache of it followed him back to his own fire regardless, familiar in a way that surprised him, with how sharply it still cut. He'd stood in exactly that kind of hushed, aching dark once himself. Had said nearly those same words to Rachel, the night before he rode east, both of them pretending harder than either believed that everything would still be standing together when he came back. He hadn't come back to anything standing at all. He found himself, unexpectedly, hoping harder than he had any right to, that these two managed better than he had. The next morning, before the second trial began, Lone Timber called a smaller gathering, Cole, Fast Current, and a handful of the strongest remaining warriors, away from the main camp, voice low, urgent. "If Crane means to move against us," the chief said, "he will not announce it kindly first. We prepare as though the danger comes today, not eventually. They spent that hour dividing what little the camp had. Rifles, few as they were, distributed to those steadiest of hand. Knives sharpened. A rough plan sketched in the dirt, with a stick, where the elders, and those unable to fight would shelter, which ridge offered the best cover, which paths Cole and Fast Current had already cleared of Crane's buried traps, and which remained dangerous enough to serve, if needed, as a killing ground of their own making. "You've done this before," one of the warriors said to Cole, watching him sketch defensive lines, with the easy competence of long practice. "More times than I'd have liked," Cole admitted. "Hope my scouting days were behind me. Seems the desert had other plans." Willow's song moved among the warriors, as they worked, quiet, steady, checking blades, checking bindings, her hands never quite still despite the calm she was clearly working hard to maintain on her face. Cole caught her eyes once, briefly, and saw in them the same fear he'd overheard the night before, carefully folded away now beneath practiced composure. "You'll watch him," she said to Cole, when their paths crossed near the horses. "Not a question." "Best I can. That is all I can ask of anyone, I suppose?" She managed something close to a smile, brittle, brave. "Thank you. For all of it." "Not done yet," Cole said. "Save the thanks till we are." She nodded, and moved on, and Cole watched her go, thinking that whatever else this desert had cost these people, it hadn't managed, yet to take the particular courage that let a person keep loving somebody fully, in the middle of everything trying to convince them not to. That evening, Willow's song came to his fire again, carrying a woven blanket, and a bowl of something warm, same as she had the first night at the spring. "You should eat," she said. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." Cole accepted the bowl. "Much obliged." She sat, careful distance kept, same as before. Looked at the stars instead of at him. "Why do you do this?" she asked finally. "You could simply leave. Nobody would stop you now." "Because the right thing isn't always the easy thing," Cole said. "And because two people who love each other shouldn't be kept apart by a debt neither of them chose to owe." Her eyes shone, tears held carefully back, the kind of restraint that clearly cost her something to maintain. "Fast Current has told you." "He told me. And I can see plain enough in your face that it's true. My father is a good man," she said softly. "But sometimes honor blinds him. He believes he's doing right, paying a sacred debt. He doesn't see what it costs the people paying it alongside him." "He'll see," Cole said. "I only need to pass these trials. Then I'll have the right to name my own solution." "And what solution is that?" Cole allowed himself something close to a smile, the first genuine one in what felt like days. "You'll see." She studied him a long moment, after that, something searching in her expression. "You loved someone once. The way we love each other." It wasn't a question. Cole didn't pretend it was. "Still do," he said quietly. "She's gone. Has been a while now. Doesn't change the loving part much, though. Just changes what a man does with it afterward." Willow's song was quiet a moment, respectful of the weight in that. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Cole looked into the fire. "But it's part of why I understand what you and Fast Current stand to lose. And why I won't be the reason you lose it." She left not long after, and this time, she looked back at him once, before disappearing into the dark, something like gratitude in the glance, something like hope finally allowed to exist a little more openly than before. Dawn painted the desert gold, and bruised purple, and the second trial began, before the heat could climb high enough to make it worse than it already promised to be. Cole had learned, the night before, exactly what this trial required, and it had settled cold in his stomach the moment Fast Current explained it plain. Crane's men had been busy in the days before the spring was found. Buried charges. Iron jaw traps meant for wolves, repurposed for something crueler. Scattered without pattern, through a stretch of the valley Crane's surveyors clearly meant to fence off entirely, once the people currently living on it were gone one way or another. "Find them," Fast Current had said. Mark them. Clear a path safe enough for the camp to move through, should we need to move fast. Harm no one in the process. That is the trial. And if I miss one? Fast Current hadn't answered that. Hadn't needed to. The night before, the two of them had sat together working out an approach, Cole sketching in the dirt the same methodical grid pattern his old unit had used clearing suspect ground during the war. We move in lines, Cole had said. Slow. Overlapping. I'll take the ground closest to camp, work outward. You scout ahead of me, eyes only, no touching anything, until I've had a look first. You do not trust my hands with this work. Trust your hands fine. Trust unfamiliar ground less. These aren't traps your people set. Different mind built these. Different mind thinks different tricks. Fast Current had considered that, then nodded, accepting the logic, without further argument, which Cole had come to recognize these past days, as about as close to a compliment as the younger man was inclined to offer. Then we begin at first light, Fast Current had said. And we do not stop until the path is clear, however long the day runs. Agreed. Cole moved slow through the marked stretch of ground, eyes down, reading dirt the way his grandfather had taught him to read shadows. A patch of sand slightly too smooth. A rock set at an angle nature wouldn't have chosen on its own. The faint metallic glint of something that didn't belong buried an inch below, where boots would naturally fall. He found the first trap 40 yards in. Knelt slow. Careful. Worked the mechanism loose, with a stick rather than a hand, the way he'd learned to disarm things in the war, that were built specifically to punish carelessness. It sprang. Iron jaws snapping shut on nothing, but air, and Cole's held breath. He marked the spot. Moved on. The second was worse. Buried deeper, tripwire strung low between two rocks, nearly invisible except for a thin disturbance in the dust, where the wire had settled slightly since it was laid. He traced it back, found the charge at the far end, and spent 10 careful minutes working it free, without triggering anything that would have taken his hands off at the wrist. By midday he'd found 6. Marked each one, a small cairn of stones beside every hidden threat, a language the whole camp could read, without needing English, or Apache either one. Fast Current worked a parallel line 20 yards off, scouting ahead, calling low warnings whenever his eyes caught something Cole's had missed. There, Fast Current said once, sharp, stopping Cole mid-step. Do not move your right foot. Cole froze. Looked down. A wire, thin as thread, resting exactly where his boot had been about to land. Obliged, Cole said, voice tighter than he meant it to sound. You are not supposed to need my help, Fast Current said, almost smiling. This is your trial. Didn't realize almost losing a foot was part of the scoring. It would have made a memorable story, at least. Man could do with fewer memorable stories some days. The 7th trap nearly finished him. Cole had grown confident by then, the way a man grows confident, after 6 clean disarms in a row, and confidence, he knew better than most, was exactly the moment danger liked best to arrive. This one wasn't buried in open ground. It was set inside a narrow crevice between 2 boulders, the kind of gap a thirsty animal might squeeze, through looking for shade, and Crane's men had clearly understood that too, because the charge sat wired to a pressure plate disguised as nothing more than another flat stone among 100 others just like it. Cole's boot was an inch from it before Fast Current's shout cut across the whole valley. Stop! Cole froze mid-stride, balance already shifting forward, weight already halfway committed to a step he could not fully take back. For one long, terrible second, his whole body hung suspended between motion and catastrophe, muscles screaming with the effort of undoing what momentum had already mostly decided. He rocked back. Slow. Careful. Landed his weight instead on solid rock 2 feet clear of the plate. His heart hammered, so hard he could feel it in his teeth. That was close, Fast Current said, crossing the distance fast, face pale under his own weathered color. Was, Cole managed, breath still catching. Obliged. Again. You keep saying that word. Obliged. As though it settles something between us. Man runs out of better words under enough pressure. They knelt together this time, working the crevice trap free, with 4 careful hands instead of 2, either of them speaking, until the charge lay harmless in the sand between them, defanged, its danger reduced to nothing more than dead metal and spent wire. Cole sat back on his heels, exhaling long and slow, the particular exhale of a man who has just watched his own mortality walk past close enough to touch. "You saved my life just now," he said. "You are welcome," Fast Current said. Simple. Almost light. Then, quieter. "We are not so different, you and I. Both of us keeping something quiet, because there is no acceptable way to set it down. Perhaps that is why the spirits keep putting us in each other's path today." Cole didn't have an answer for that. Just nodded, and they moved on together, cairn by cairn, the whole rest of that long afternoon. By late afternoon, they'd cleared a path nearly a mile long, cairns marking every buried threat like a trail of warning stones, through country that had tried, twice now, to kill everyone walking it. Cole stood at the end of the cleared path, looking back at the marked trail, and felt the same cold certainty settle into him that the survey stakes had planted days before. This wasn't defense. Wasn't even simple cruelty. This was a perimeter. A boundary drawn in buried iron and hidden wire, meant to fence in exactly the ground the spring occupied, and meant to make sure anyone still living inside that boundary either left permanently or didn't leave at all. "He means to take everything," Fast Current said quietly, standing beside him, looking at the same cairns Cole was looking at. "He means to take everything," Cole agreed. "And he means for it to look like an accident, when he does." They stood there a long moment, 2 men looking out at a threat neither of them had chosen, but both of them now, undeniably, shared. That night, Cole couldn't sleep. Walked the perimeter of the camp instead, restless, turning the day over in his mind the way he turned over anything that refused to sit still and let itself be settled. That was when he saw Gray Feather, moving quiet through the dark, away from camp, toward the ridge line, alone, careful in a way that had nothing to do with an old man simply needing privacy to relieve himself. Cole followed. Kept his distance. Kept low. At the ridge, Gray Feather stopped. Waited. And after several minutes, a rider emerged from the dark on the far side, dismounted, exchanged words too low for Cole to catch from this distance, but the shape of it was plain enough even without the words. A small pouch changed hands. Gray Feather took it. Tucked it inside his coat. The rider mounted back up. Rode off the way he'd come. Cole stepped out from the rocks once the rider was well gone. Gray Feather froze. Turned. And whatever composure the old man had carried through 3 days of gratitude and quiet dignity collapsed all at once, all the way down to something small and frightened and deeply, painfully human. "How long?" Cole said. Quiet. Not accusing yet. Just asking. Gray Feather didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had none of the steadiness Cole had come to expect from him. "Since before you found us," he said. "Since the wells? You told them where we were. I told them what I had to." Gray Feather's hands trembled, whether from age or shame Cole couldn't say. "I have buried 3 children in my life, Cole Ashford. 2 grandchildren after that. Each time, I told myself, next time, I will be strong enough to protect what remains. Each time, I have been wrong. So you sold the rest of them out. To save yourself? To save what I have left." The old man's eyes were wet now, and old, and utterly without the dignity Cole had admired in him just days before. "The man who pays me says my family will be spared, when it comes. That we will be allowed to leave safely, before the worst of it. You believe that?" Gray Feather was quiet a long moment. "No," he admitted finally. "I don't believe it at all. I simply didn't know what else fear allows an old man to do, except believe whatever lets him keep breathing one more day. Cole stood there, torn between fury and something closer to pity, and found, in the end, that both were true at once, occupying the same space inside him, without canceling each other out. He thought of the water Grey Feather had drunk last, that first afternoon, after 5 others had gone before him. Thought of the hand pressed light, as paper against his forearm, and I do not forget this, whatever comes, I do not forget this. Words that had felt entirely true then. Words that felt, now, like they belonged to 2 different men wearing the same tired face. Because a man could be broken, and still be brave, somewhere underneath the breaking. Because fear didn't erase gratitude, it just sat alongside it, ugly, uncomfortable, both of them true at the same time whether Cole liked it or not. Except he wasn't sure, yet whether understanding a thing meant a man had to forgive it. Which was its own kind of unsettled ground to be standing on, this late in the night, with an old man's whole shame laid bare in front of him. You have to tell him, Cole said finally. Lone Timber. Tonight. He will banish me. Or worse. Maybe. Cole's voice didn't soften. But every day this stays buried is a day Crane knows more about us than we know about him. That's a debt too, old man. Same as the one you keep lecturing me about. Grey Feather looked at him a long moment. Something in his face breaking further, and then, slowly, settling into something Cole almost recognized as resolve. Walk with me, then, Grey Feather said. If I must fall, let me at least fall walking toward it, instead of running from it one more night. Lone Timber's face, when Grey Feather finished his confession by the low burning fire, went through several things in quick succession. Disbelief first. Then anger, sharp and sudden. Then something colder and more exhausted than either. How much did he pay you? Lone Timber asked. Voice flat. Enough to matter to a frightened old man. Nothing close to enough to matter against what it's cost us. You knew the wells. The stakes. Everything. I knew pieces. I told him pieces. Grey Feather didn't look away, to his credit. I told myself it was the only way to protect what family I have left. I understand now that I protected nothing. Only postponed my own shame. Quiet Rain rose, furious, voice shaking. You sat beside me at every council these 3 years. You spoke of loyalty. Of honor. While selling both, quietly, the whole time. I did not sell honor. Grey Feather said, quiet but unflinching. I sold information, believing it would cost this camp nothing it hadn't already lost. I was wrong about that. I have been wrong about a great many things lately, it seems. Wrong does not return the dead. Quiet Rain snapped. No, Grey Feather agreed. It does not. Nothing I say tonight returns anything. I offer only the truth, since I have nothing else left worth offering. Fast Current, standing at the edge of the firelight, looked ready to do something violent. Lone Timber raised a hand. Before it could happen, same gesture he'd used to still the young man's fury, that first day at the water's edge. What do we do with him? Quiet Rain demanded. Lone Timber was quiet a long while, staring into the fire like it might offer an answer the rest of them couldn't. We do nothing tonight, he said finally. Tonight we need every hand we have, guilty or not. Tomorrow, after the 3rd trial, we decide what justice looks like for this. His eyes found Grey Feather's, hard, unreadable. But understand me, old friend. The debt you owe now is larger than the one Cole Ashford paid for us. And I do not yet know how you intend to answer it. Grey Feather bowed his head. Said nothing further. The confession changed something in the air of the whole camp, subtle but unmistakable, the way weather changes, before a storm actually arrives. Because now they knew, with certainty, exactly how much Crane already understood about them. The layout of the camp. The timing of the trials. Likely even the hour the 3rd trial was set to begin. He'll come tomorrow, Fast Current said, standing with Cole near the horses, voice low. During the combat. When the whole camp is watching one thing, and not another. That's my guess too, Cole said. Then we prepare for 2 fights instead of 1. Reckon we do. The rest of that day, Cole spent every hour he could spare teaching what the war had left him knowing. He gathered a handful of the steadiest warriors, and a few of the women who'd asked, plainly, not to simply be sheltered, while others fought for them, and walked them through how to use the cleared, cairn-marked ground as a funnel instead of merely an obstacle. How to hold fire until a target was close enough that missing became difficult. How to fall back in stages rather than all at once, buying time without giving up ground entirely. Rifles are precious, he told them, crouched in the dirt, sketching lines with a stick the same way he had for Lone Timber's counsel. Which means every shot has to count. Don't fire at what you can't hit. Fire at what you can't miss. One of the women, older, steady-eyed, a rifle resting easy across her knees despite clearly never having fired one before this week, asked the question Cole had been waiting for somebody to ask. What if we run out of shots before they run out of men? Then you use what's left, Cole said. Knives. Rocks. Bare hands if it comes to that. A man expecting an easy fight is slower to recognize a hard one. Sometimes that half-second of his surprise is worth more than a full magazine. Fast Current watched all this, with an expression Cole had started to recognize as something close to genuine respect, buried underneath the last, thinning traces of old suspicion. You teach this the way a man teaches something he wishes he never had to learn himself. Fast Current observed, during a break, both of them resting in whatever shade the rocks offered. That's about the size of it, Cole admitted. Wish to God nobody here needed any of it. Wishing don't change what's likely coming, though. No, Fast Current agreed. It rarely does. By evening, 40 tired people had become, if not soldiers exactly, then at least something harder to simply overrun than they'd been 3 days before. Cole watched them practicing the fallback maneuver one final time, as the light failed, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest alongside the dread. Purpose. Plain and simple. The particular kind that comes from being genuinely needed by people worth the needing. That evening, once the others had scattered to whatever rest they could manage, Fast Current pulled Cole aside a final time. You taught us your soldiers' tricks, he said. Now I teach you one of ours, since we may need it, before this ends. He showed Cole a set of hand signs, quick, economical, meant to carry across distance, without a sound, a closed fist for hold position, 2 fingers crossed for enemy sighted, a flat palm pressed down for fall back now, quiet, no argument. Cole practiced them, until his hands found the shapes, without needing his mind to walk them through it first, the same way the war had once taught him to load a rifle in the dark without looking. Good, Fast Current said, satisfied, after the 5th clean repetition. If tomorrow goes as badly as I suspect it might, we will not have breath to spare for words. This will have to do instead. Obliged, Cole said. Then, after a moment, for all of it. Not just the signs. Fast Current studied him a moment, something unguarded passing briefly across his face, before the usual composure reasserted itself. 3 days ago I would not have believed I'd say this. But I am glad my horse spooked correctly enough to bring you into this desert, Cowboy. Whatever comes tomorrow. Same goes, Cole said. Same goes entirely. Fast Current looked at him a long moment, the earlier lightness fading back into something more serious. You could still leave tonight, Cowboy. Ride to your ranch. Nobody would call you a coward for it. Cole almost laughed, short, humorless. Already had this conversation with your uncle 3 nights back. Answer's the same now as it was then. Which is? Reckon I stay. Cole checked Duke's cinch, tightened it, methodical. Long as it's useful. Fast Current nodded slow. Something passing between them that neither man needed to name out loud. Then get some rest, Fast Current said. Tomorrow asks everything of both of us. Cole didn't rest, not really, not in any way that counted. Lay on his bedroll a long while, staring up at stars, that had become, these past days, almost familiar to him, the way a stranger's face becomes familiar once you've studied it enough times to know its moods. He thought about Rachel again, the way he seemed to keep doing lately, though the thinking had changed shape somehow, since that first gentle dream. Less like reopening a wound. More like visiting a grave he'd finally stopped being afraid of standing beside. He thought about the 6 men, who didn't come home, from that ravine. About Doyle, 19 years old, rifle raised, trigger pulled on a cartridge that should have fired. About how long he'd carried that quiet, particular fury, telling himself it was simply grief, when some part of it, he understood now, had always been waiting for exactly this, a name, a face, a chance to answer what had never been properly answered before. Because a man could carry an old wound a long time, without it costing him anything visible. Until something reopened it. Until the reopening turned out to be exactly what he needed, however much it hurt going in. He wasn't sure, yet, whether tomorrow would settle that wound or simply deepen it further. He supposed he'd find out either way, same as everything else out here lately. Somewhere near midnight, unable to lie still any longer, he rose and checked on Duke, then walked the perimeter once more, restless. Near the far side of camp, he passed close enough to see Fast Current and Willow's song together one final time, before dawn, standing close, foreheads nearly touching, either one speaking, as though words had finally become unnecessary between them, or simply too dangerous to risk breaking the fragile quiet they'd built. Willow's song's hand rested against Fast Current's chest, over his heart, still, deliberate. Whatever passed between them in that silence, Cole understood well enough not to need the words translated. Some things a man recognizes regardless of the language they're spoken in, or not spoken in at all. He gave them their privacy, moving on quiet, and found Gray Feather awake too, sitting alone near the water, apart from everyone, the way a man sits, when he's decided his own company is the only company he still deserves. Cole almost walked past without a word. Stopped instead. "Couldn't sleep either," he said. Not really a question. Gray Feather looked up, surprised, wary, as though expecting the remark to be a preamble to something crueler. "No," he admitted. "I find myself doing arithmetic of my own tonight. Different from Lone Timbers. Perhaps not so different, in the end." "What kind?" "Wondering how many people I've saved across a long life, weighed against how many I may have cost, at the very end of it, through one frightened mistake." He shook his head slow. "I do not think the numbers balance kindly." Cole sat, not quite beside him, not quite apart either. Numbers rarely do. Man spends his whole life hoping they will anyway. They sat together, while in a silence that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't quite condemnation either, something unsettled and human occupying the space between the two, the way most true things about people generally do. Far to the north, Silas Crane received word by rider shortly after midnight, information paid for, and delivered on schedule same as everything else in his operation. "Third trials tomorrow morning," the messenger reported. "Whole camp will be watching it. Old Man Feather says it's the one chance we'll get before they start posting proper watches again." Crane considered this, over the rim of his glass, lantern light steady on a face that betrayed nothing beyond mild, professional satisfaction. "Move the men up tonight," he said. "Position them close enough to ride in fast the moment that fight begins. I want them distracted, disorganized, and unable to answer before we've already taken the ground we came for. And the cowboy. Kill him first, if the opportunity presents itself cleanly." Crane set the glass down, finished. A complication removed early saves considerably more trouble than one left to fester. See it done quietly, if quiet is possible. Loudly if it isn't. Either way, by this time tomorrow, I intend to own that water outright. The messenger left. Crane rolled his map open one final time, tracing the surveyed boundary, with one careful finger, already picturing the road, the shafts, the money that ground would yield once the last inconvenient obstacle standing on it had finally, permanently, been cleared away. The final trial began at first light. The whole camp gathered in a wide circle around a patch of flattened sand at the center of everything. The rules were simple, brutal in their simplicity. No weapons. Combat until one man couldn't continue, or surrendered outright. Strikes were not forbidden. The purpose wasn't injury. The purpose was proving something about endurance, about will, about a man's capacity to keep standing, after every reasonable argument said he should already be on the ground. Cole and Fast Current faced each other at the circle's center. Both had removed their shirts, exposing the particular map of scars that hard living leaves on a body, different scars, different stories, same underlying cost. A puckered mark on Cole's shoulder, where a bullet had once passed through, souvenir of a wagon train he hadn't been able to leave behind. A long pale line across Fast Current's ribs, older, the story of it not offered, and not asked for. Before the signal, Fast Current reached to his own neck, and drew off a small braided cord, plain, worn smooth by years of handling, and pressed it into Cole's hand. "For luck," he said, gruff, clearly uncomfortable with the sentiment even as he offered it. "Or so my mother always claimed. I have never needed it before today." Cole turned the cord over once, then tied it quick around his own wrist. "Obliged. Do not lose to me while wearing it. I would never hear the end of that from her spirit. Wasn't planning on losing at all." "Good. Neither was I." "Don't hold back," Fast Current murmured, low enough only Cole could hear. "If this needs to look real to everyone watching, it has to feel real to us too." "It will," Cole said, allowing himself the ghost of a smile. Lone Timber raised his arm. The whole circle went silent, that particular silence a crowd makes when it's genuinely uncertain how something is going to end. Willow's song stood near the front, hands clasped so tight together Cole could see the strain of it even from across the circle. Gray Feather stood further back, apart, a man carrying a second weight now that had nothing to do with the fight about to start. Then his arm dropped. Fast Current moved first, fast, controlled, a predator's economy of motion. Cole blocked, countered, took a blow to the ribs that stole the breath clean out of him. They locked together, pure strength against pure strength, feet fighting for purchase in sand that gave way beneath both of them equally. Because this wasn't like fighting a stranger. Because every instinct Cole had built across 2 years of genuine combat kept catching itself, kept pulling back from the full weight of a blow that could have landed harder. Except pulling back too far would give the whole performance away, would tell every watching face that this fight was staged, and staged wouldn't satisfy anyone's honor, least of all his own. So he found the narrow, difficult middle ground between holding back and holding nothing back at all, and both men, it turned out, were skilled enough to find that same ground together, blow for blow, breath for breath. The fight went on. Minutes stretching into something closer to an hour, both men soaked through with sweat, breathing ragged, bodies screaming every reasonable argument for quitting that bodies know how to make. Neither man surrendered. Cole took a knee once, hard, Fast Current's forearm catching him across the jaw in a blow that rang his whole skull like a struck bell. He tasted blood, spat, rose again before the count of 3, because staying down even 1 second longer than necessary felt, in that moment, like a kind of lying he wasn't prepared to commit in front of 40 people counting on the truth of this. Fast Current went down twice himself, once from a leg sweep that dropped him hard onto his back, once from sheer exhaustion catching up faster than his pride was willing to admit. Both times he rose the same way Cole had, refusing the easy mercy of simply staying down. The crowd watched in a hush that had long since passed simple entertainment, and moved into something closer to reverence. These trials rarely lasted this long. These two men, it was becoming clear to everyone watching, were matched almost exactly, strength for strength, will for will. Cole's mind, somewhere in the exhaustion, kept circling back to a single thought, over and over, the way a man's thoughts do, when his body has stopped being able to argue with anything except the next breath. Because this wasn't really about winning. Because it never had been. Because somewhere in this fight was the only currency this world seemed to respect, and that currency was simply refusing to stop. Until his arms felt like lead, and his lungs felt like fire, and still, somehow, he found one more block, one more push, one more refusal to be the one who quit first. An hour in. Both men fell to their knees at almost the exact same instant, strength finally, mutually, entirely spent. Fast Current extended a hand. Cole took it. They pulled each other upright, unsteady, both grinning despite everything, the particular grin of men who've just survived something together, and know it. "Ty," Lone Timber began, rising, his voice carrying real warmth for the first time in days. "You have proven your worth beyond doubt, Colash." He never finished the sentence. A cry went up from the ridge line, sharp, urgent, a warrior's voice cutting clean through the morning air. "Riders. Coming fast. More than a handful." Cole's head snapped toward the sound, exhaustion forgotten in an instant, every muscle in his body going tight the way it used to go tight, before a battle he'd known, deep down, was always going to arrive eventually. Fast Current was already moving, already shouting orders in Apache, the crowd around them shifting in one single motion, from stillness to controlled chaos. Cole looked toward the ridge. Dust rising. A dozen riders, maybe more, closing fast across the flat, rifles catching the early light, moving with the particular unhurried confidence of men who already believed, with good reason, that they'd chosen the exact moment their targets would be least prepared to answer them. Silas Crane had learned everything he needed to know about when this camp would be least prepared to defend itself. And he hadn't wasted a single hour of that knowledge. Cole's eyes found Willow's songs for one brief, charged instant across the chaos of the scattering crowd, her fear plain, her trust in him plainer still, and then there was no more time left for anything except what came next. His body, exhausted past the point he'd have thought possible an hour ago, found some last reserve anyway, the way a body always seems to, when the alternative is simply not acceptable. He reached for the rifle propped against a nearby rock, checked the load, with hands that had gone suddenly, completely steady. Because there wasn't room left for exhaustion now. Because there wasn't room for the ache in his ribs, or the blood still drying at the corner of his mouth, or any of the dozen small costs the morning's fight had already extracted from him. Which meant all of it would have to wait. Which meant, for now, there was only the ridge, and the dust, and 40 people, who had trusted him, with something considerably larger than water. Fast Current appeared at his shoulder, rifle already in hand, breathing hard, eyes locked on the same approaching dust. "Together," Fast Current said. Not a question. "Together," Cole answered. And the riders kept coming. The riders came on fast, and there wasn't time left to be tired anymore. Cole dropped to one knee behind the nearest boulder, rifle steady despite arms that had spent the last hour fighting Fast Current instead of Crane's men. Because exhaustion was a luxury. Because a body found reserves it didn't know it had the instant the alternative stopped being acceptable. He'd learned that in the war. He was learning it again now. His mind raced ahead of his hands, cataloging threats the way his years of scouting had trained him to, faster than conscious thought could properly keep pace with. 12 riders. Maybe 14. Rifles, not just pistols. Which meant this wasn't a raid meant to scare. This was a raid meant to finish something. Which meant there wasn't room left for anything except the next 3 seconds, over and over, until there wasn't a next 3 seconds left to worry about anymore. "Funnel!" he shouted. "Same as we drilled!" Fast Current was already moving, already directing warriors, and women both toward the cairn-marked path they'd cleared 2 days before, the one safe corridor, through ground that would swallow a careless horse whole. Because that was the whole point of clearing it. Because a path only he, and this camp knew the true safe line of was worth more right now than any wall they could have built in a week. The first wave of riders hit the edge of that ground at a dead gallop, confident, careless, exactly the way men ride, when they believe the ground ahead is simply ground. It wasn't. The first horse went down screaming, an iron trap snapping shut on a four-legged crane's men hadn't bothered mapping, because they'd never expected anyone circling back to leave a few traps unmarked on purpose. Its rider pitched forward hard into the sand. The second rider swerved wide to avoid the commotion, and rode straight into a stretch Cole had deliberately left rough, forcing his mount to stumble, slow, present a target. "Now!" Fast Current called. The rifles Cole had spent a day teaching people to trust spoke together, ragged but effective, and 2 more riders went down, before the charge even reached the outer ring of tents. Because this wasn't the ambush Crane had planned. Because Crane had counted on catching 40 exhausted, distracted people flat-footed in the middle of a wrestling match. Instead he'd ridden his men straight into a killing ground built from his own buried treachery, turned back against him by the very people he'd meant it to murder. Cole fired, worked the lever, fired again, the particular cold clarity of combat settling over him the way it always had, the world narrowing down to targets and cover, and the next 3 seconds, nothing more, nothing less. A rider bore down on him fast, pistol raised. Cole rolled clear, came up firing, and the man's horse reared, throwing its rider hard into rock. Somewhere to his left, Willow Song's voice rang out, sharp, commanding, directing 2 of the older women toward a fallback position exactly the way Cole had drilled them. Fear plain in her voice. Steadiness plainer. Somewhere further off, Fast Current fought 2 men at once, knife flashing, moving with the same economical violence he'd shown Cole in the trial circle, except now there was nothing performed about it at all. Iron Bluff held the second line, with 3 younger warriors, rifles working in careful rotation, one firing while the others reloaded, exactly the rhythm Cole had drilled into them across one long, dreading afternoon. Quiet Rain, of all people, stood near the water's edge, with a rifle steadied against a rock, felling a rider at a range Cole wouldn't have guessed the old woman capable of managing. Because fear, it turned out, made fighters out of people who never expected to become one. Because a person defending everything they had left found strength in places strength had no business hiding. And somewhere in the chaos, Cole lost track of Gray Feather entirely. Because that was when it happened. A second group of riders, 6, maybe 7, broke off from the main charge, swinging wide around the camp's flank, clearly meaning to hit, from behind, from the direction nobody had thought to fortify, because nobody had known to expect it. Nobody except one old man, sitting apart these past days, with a debt he couldn't stop doing arithmetic on. Gray Feather saw them first. Understood, in one terrible instant, exactly what they intended, and exactly how few heartbeats stood between that intention and its completion. He didn't call for help. There wasn't time, and calling would have cost the one advantage he actually had left to spend. He rode out alone. Cole caught sight of him only after it was already happening, an old man on an unremarkable horse, riding hard and straight into the path of 6 armed riders, arms raised, shouting something in Apache that carried, just barely, over the gunfire. Fast Current's head snapped around. No! Whatever Gray Feather shouted, it bought exactly long enough. The flanking riders slowed, confused by an old man riding directly at them, with nothing in his hands, and that confusion cost them the 2 or 3 seconds it took for warriors Cole had positioned exactly for this to open fire, from the ridge above. 3 riders went down in that first volley. Gray Feather did not. A shot took him, from his horse, before the exchange finished, and he fell hard, into sand that had, 3 days ago, been the ground he'd helped betray, and was now, in this single reckless act, the ground he'd chosen to die defending instead. Cole reached him first, sliding to his knees in the sand beside the old man, hands already moving to find the wound, already knowing, before his hands finished the search, that this particular wound wasn't the kind that hands could fix. Don't, Gray Feather managed. Breath thin, wet, fading fast. Don't waste effort. I've made my peace with this arithmetic tonight, Cole Ashford. Finally. The numbers balance at the end. You didn't have to. I did. A ghost of the old dignity Cole had admired, That first afternoon flickered back into the old man's face. I sold this camp's safety once, out of fear. Tonight I bought some of it back. That is the only ledger that has ever mattered. I understand that now. Only now, perhaps too late to matter to anyone but myself. Matters to them. Cole said, voice rough. Matters plenty. Gray Feather's eyes found something past Cole's shoulder, Lone Timber, arriving fast, dropping to his knees on the old man's other side, face carved from something harder than grief, and softer than fury both at once. Old friend, Lone Timber said. I did not deserve that word these past days, Gray Feather whispered. I hope, tonight I have earned some small right to it again. You have, Lone Timber said. Firm. Final. The kind of firm that leaves no room for the dying man to argue otherwise. Gray Feather's eyes drifted to the sky, to stars just beginning to fade behind the coming dawn, and whatever he saw there seemed to settle something in him completely. He didn't speak again. Cole knelt there a moment longer than the battle strictly allowed him to, hands still resting on the old man's shoulder, unwilling, somehow, to be the one who let go first. Because a man could spend a whole life being defined by his worst hour, if the people around him chose to let it. Except that wasn't how it had to work. Except sometimes the last thing a person did mattered more than every frightened thing that came before it, if the last thing was brave enough, true enough, costly enough to outweigh the rest. Which meant Gray Feather hadn't died a traitor. He died a man who'd finally, at the very end, found his way back to who he'd always meant to be. Cole closed the old man's eyes, gentle. There wasn't time to grieve properly. Not yet. The battle wasn't finished, and grief, like exhaustion, was a luxury the morning hadn't yet agreed to grant. Cole rose, jaw tight, rifle back in his hands before he'd fully processed standing. Looked toward the center of the chaos, where the largest cluster of riders had regrouped, reforming for a second push straight through the camp's heart. At the center of that cluster, mounted, watching rather than fighting, sat a man in a coat too clean for this kind of morning. Silas Crane. Cole's whole body went cold, and still at once, the particular stillness that comes right before a man does something he's spent a long time deciding whether he's willing to do. Because there he was. The name on a shirt. The name on a ledger. The name behind 6 letters written to 6 families, who never learned the truth of what killed the men they loved. Because Cole could end this right now, could put a bullet through that clean coat, before Crane even registered the threat, and no jury in any territory would ever call it anything but self-defense against an armed attacker. His finger found the trigger. Settled there. Steady. Until Lone Timber's voice came back to him, clear as the night he'd first heard it. Vengeance asks only that the other man suffer. Justice asks that the wrong be answered, plainly enough that even those who caused it must recognize the truth of what they did. Which meant a bullet, however satisfying, wouldn't actually answer anything. Would only end it. And ending wasn't the same as answering, however much, in this exact moment, his whole body wanted to believe otherwise. Because Doyle deserved better than a quick death delivered to the man responsible. Because 6 families deserved a truth spoken out loud in a room that mattered, not a secret settled quiet in the sand, where nobody but Cole would ever know it happened. Except knowing that, and feeling it settled deep enough to actually change his finger's decision, were 2 very different things, and for one long, terrible second, Cole genuinely didn't know which one was going to win. Then, slow, he let the second one win. So he lowered the rifle. Just slightly. Just enough to change what came next. Take him alive! Cole called, voice carrying across the chaos. If it can be managed. Alive is worth more to us than dead. Fast Current, fighting 20 yards off, heard it, understood it, and adjusted his own aim accordingly, driving the men around Crane back rather than through them. The fight around Crane collapsed fast once his remaining men understood the funnel had gutted their numbers, and the flanking maneuver had failed entirely. 3 surrendered outright, hands raised, rifles dropped in the sand. 2 more broke, and ran for the ridge, riding hard for whatever remained of Crane's operation to the north. One rider, bolder or more desperate than the rest, tried to make a break straight, through the center of camp, rifle raised toward a cluster of women sheltering near the trading post's half-built frame. Fast current intercepted him at a dead run, closing the distance faster than the horse could adjust, and threw himself bodily at the rider, both men crashing hard, into the dirt in a tangle of limbs and dust. The rifle discharged wild, harmlessly, into empty sky, and Fast current came up first, knife already at the man's throat, before the rider had finished catching his breath. "Yield," Fast current said. Simple. Final. The man yielded. Cole reached them a moment later, breathing hard, and found Fast current already rising, already moving toward the next threat, no time spared for anything beyond the barest acknowledgement that both of them had survived that particular exchange. "You good?" Cole called. "Good," Fast current answered. "You good?" Because that was about as much conversation as combat left room for. Because the rest of it, the relief, the gratitude, the particular fierce joy of watching a friend survive something that could easily have gone otherwise, would have to wait for later, same as everything else this morning didn't have space to properly hold yet. Crane himself tried to run last, wheeling his horse hard, and Fast current's rope caught him clean around the shoulders, before he'd gone 20 feet, yanking him backward off the saddle, into the dirt, with a violence that felt, to everyone watching, considerably more like justice than mercy. Cole crossed the distance slow, rifle still raised, and looked down at the man properly for the first time. Up close, Crane looked smaller than the shape he'd cast across 2 years of Cole's memory. Just a man. Dust on his fine coat now. Fear, however carefully controlled, finally visible in eyes that had spent a long career believing consequences happened to other people. "Ashford," Crane said, recognizing something in Cole's face, some story he'd clearly heard secondhand, and dismissed as a complication rather than a reckoning. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "We have," Cole said, voice flat. "Just not in person. A ravine north of the Gila crossing, about 2 years back. Rifles that jammed when it mattered most. Cartridges with your company's mark stamped right on the crate." Something shifted in Crane's face, not quite recognition, not quite guilt, more the particular calculation of a man rapidly reassessing how much trouble he was actually in. "Business," Crane said, careful now. "Contracts get filled fast in wartime. Mistakes happen. 6 men didn't come home, because of your mistake," Cole said. "I've carried that a long while, not knowing whose name to carry it toward. Reckon I know now. You can't prove a single cartridge in that shipment was mine specifically. Contracts get subcontracted. Materials get shared between suppliers. It's a complicated business, Mr. Ashford. Funny thing about complicated business." Cole's voice stayed level, though something hard had settled behind it. "Man who runs it usually keeps a ledger. Careful. Precise. The kind that doesn't leave much room for complicated explanations, once somebody else gets a look at it." Crane's jaw tightened, the first genuine crack Cole had seen in him yet. "You don't have my ledger. Don't I?" The silence that followed told Cole everything he needed to know about whether Crane believed his own bluff. "What do you want?" Crane said finally, voice lower now, calculation replacing bravado. "Money. I have considerably more of it than whatever this desert's paying you." Wasn't asking for a negotiation. Everyone negotiates, Mr. Ashford. It's simply a matter of finding the right price. Not this time. Cole's eyes didn't waver. This time you're going to answer for it. Properly. In a room, with a colonel, and a set of federal charges, not in a desert, with a bullet nobody'd ever be able to prove came from anywhere but self-defense. Figure that's worth considerably more to the men you got killed than anything you could offer me instead. Crane's eyes flicked toward the rifle, calculating, and Cole read the thought forming behind them a full second before Crane's hand moved toward the pistol still holstered at his hip. "Don't," Cole said. "Quiet. Final." Crane's hand stopped. Then, slow, deliberate, moved anyway, some last desperate gambler's instinct overriding whatever remained of his good sense. Fast Current's knife found his wrist before the pistol cleared leather, a fast, controlled strike that opened the man's palm and sent the weapon spinning uselessly into the sand. Crane cried out, clutching the wound, and for one long moment, kneeling there bleeding in dirt he'd meant to own outright by sundown, Silas Crane finally looked like exactly what he was. A man who had run out of ways to avoid the consequences of his own choices. "Bind him," Cole said. "And find whatever papers he's carrying. Ledgers. Contracts. Anything with his mark on it." Iron Bluff moved among the wounded, and the fallen, with a grim efficiency Cole recognized, from his own war, tending what could be tended, marking what couldn't, the particular unglamorous work that always followed battle regardless of who'd won it. "3 of ours wounded," Iron Bluff reported, finding Cole a few minutes later. "None past saving, I think, if we tend them quick. 2 horses lost. And," he paused, something heavy settling into his voice. "Gray Feather." "I know," Cole said quietly. "Saw it happen. He rode out alone. 6 against 1. Iron Bluff shook his head slow, something complicated moving across his weathered face. "I did not expect that from him. Not after what he confessed to us." "Reckon nobody did," Cole said. "That's sort of the point of it, though. Man doesn't get to choose the moment his true measure gets taken. Just has to hope, when it comes, he answers it right." Iron Bluff considered that, nodding slow. "He answered it right. Because that was the truth of it, plain and unadorned. Whatever fear had driven Gray Feather's earlier betrayal, whatever shame had followed it, none of that had stopped him from riding out alone into 6 armed men the instant his people needed exactly that kind of sacrifice. Which meant a man's worst hour, and his best hour could live inside the very same chest, close enough to touch, and somehow both remain entirely, completely true. Which was, Cole supposed, about as fair a description of being human as he'd ever managed to arrive at. Quiet rain moved among the captured men, 3 of them kneeling now, with hands bound, faces pale with the particular fear of men who'd expected an easy morning, and gotten considerably more resistance than promised. She studied them a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "What do we do with these?" she asked Cole. "Same as the 4th'll do, with Crane, most likely," Cole said. "Question them. Let them answer for their part in this, in front of people, with the authority to make that answering mean something. And if they run, once questioned, then they run," Cole said. "World's got a way of catching up to men eventually, one way or another. Seen it happen enough times to trust it, even when I can't make it happen myself." They found the saddlebags on Crane's own horse, recovered from where it had bolted during the fighting, survey maps confirming the exact boundary Cole had already guessed at, contracts for Army ordnance stamped, with the same mark that had haunted him 2 years, and a ledger, damning in its careful, precise handwriting, tracking payments made to a man named simply G. F. across the better part of a month. Cole's jaw tightened, reading that entry, understanding fully now the whole shape of what Gray Feather had confessed to, and what it had ultimately, finally, cost him to make right. "This is enough," Lone Timber said, arriving at his shoulder, reading the ledger, over Cole's arm. "Enough to answer for the wells. For the attack. For everything. Might be enough for more than that," Cole said slowly, turning through the pages. "This ledger's got contract numbers on it. Army supply numbers. Same kind stamped on crates, that got 6 of my men killed 2 years back." He looked up, something settling into place behind his eyes, cold and clear, and entirely certain. "This isn't just a land grab anymore. This is fraud against the United States Army. That's a different court altogether. A federal one. You know such courts?" "Know enough," Cole said. No, there's a 2 days ride from here with a commanding officer who'll take an interest in evidence like this, given the right introduction. Man like Crane's been getting away with murder by degrees for years, because nobody's ever had proof and motive standing in the same room at the same time. He looked down at Crane, bound now, pale, the fight and the arrogance both draining out of him in equal measure, as the reality of his situation set in. Reckon that room just got a lot more crowded, Cole said. A rider approached the camp slow, that same afternoon, alone, favoring a leg that had only recently learned to bear weight properly again, and it took Cole a moment to place the face, before recognition landed clean. The scout. The one they'd treated, fed, sent north healed a week before. Fast current tensed, hand moving toward his knife, but the rider raised both palms, empty, well before he came within range of trouble. Ain't here to fight, the man called out. Word travels fast in this territory, even among Crane's own outfit. Heard what happened here this morning. Heard you took him alive. What do you want? Cole asked, rifle still loose, but ready in his hands. To tell somebody the truth, if anybody's still willing to hear it, from a man who spent 2 years taking Crane's money, without asking hard questions about where it came from. The scout's eyes were steady now, none of the fear from their first meeting left in them. I've seen things. Contracts signed. Orders given. Enough to put weight behind whatever paper you've already got on him, if it comes to a proper hearing. Cole studied him a long moment, weighing the offer the same careful way he weighed most things that mattered. Man patched your leg once, Cole said finally, without asking what you'd done to deserve otherwise. Figured that story might do some work eventually. Didn't expect it to work quite this fast. Wasn't the leg that changed my mind, the scout admitted. Was watching an old man ride out alone, into 6 armed riders, unarmed, just to buy the rest of you time. Man like that dying for people he'd once betrayed. He shook his head slow. Made me take a hard look at what kind of man I'd been riding for instead. What's your name? Cole asked. Never did get it first time around. Whitmore. Sam Whitmore. Well, Sam Whitmore. Cole extended a hand, same as he'd once extended it to fast current across a fire that had started as an enemy's and ended as a friend's. Reckon we could use a man willing to speak plain in front of a colonel. You up for the ride? Whitmore took the hand, firm. Figure I owe you at least that much. Probably more, if I'm honest about it. The morning after the battle, the camp did what camps have always done, after surviving something they weren't certain they'd survive. It counted its cost, and then it began, slowly, to heal from it. 3 warriors wounded, none fatally, tended with the same patient care Cole had watched this camp offer strangers days before. 2 of the horses lost. Tents torn by stray fire, already being mended by hands that refused to let the morning's damage sit unaddressed any longer than necessary. And 1 grave, dug at the edge of camp, facing east, toward a sun-gray feather had spent his whole life watching rise, over ground that had never once been simple to hold onto. The whole camp gathered for it. Even the 3 of Crane's men taken captive stood at a distance, watching, silent, something in the ceremony plainly reaching even men, who had ridden in, that morning meaning to kill everyone present. Lone Timber spoke first, voice carrying clear and steady across the gathered crowd, though Cole could see what the steadiness cost him. This man failed us once, Lone Timber said. I will not stand here and pretend otherwise, for his memory deserves truth more than comfort. But this man also died saving us, without hesitation, the very moment saving us mattered most. Both things are true. I have learned this past week that most things worth understanding about a person are. He paused, looking out over the gathered faces. We do not choose only our best moment to be remembered by. Nor should we. Gray feathers arithmetic, in the end, balance toward us. Let that be what we carry forward, alongside the harder truth that came before it. Willow's song sang something low over the grave, the same kind of grief song Cole had heard, that first exhausted night at the original water's edge, except this one carried a different weight entirely, not relief this time, but something more complicated, grief and gratitude tangled together past any hope of separating them cleanly. Fast Current stepped forward once she'd finished, something visibly costing him to speak at all, given how close he'd come to violence toward this same man just 2 nights before. I wanted to hate him, Fast Current said, voice rough. For a long while after his confession, I did hate him. But I have thought, these past 2 days, about the difference between a man's fear and a man's courage, and I have come to understand they can live inside the same chest, taking turns, either one canceling the other out entirely. He looked down at the fresh earth. Greyfeather taught me that lesson at the end of his life, more clearly than he ever could have taught it, with words alone. I will carry it forward. I think that is the only proper way left to thank him. Cole stood at the edge of the gathering, hat in hand, and found himself thinking of Rachel's grave again, of 6 letters written to 6 families, of an old man's whispered confession by torchlight 2 nights back. Of how a person's whole life could hold both failure and redemption inside it at once, and how maybe that was simply what being human cost a soul, one way or another, sooner or later. He didn't have words fit for the moment. Just stood there, present, the way a man stands present for things too large to properly speak to, and let that be enough. Later, once the crowd had thinned, and only Lone Timber remained beside the fresh grave, Cole approached quiet, unwilling to intrude, but unwilling, too, to leave the old chief entirely alone, with whatever he was carrying. He was your friend a long while, Cole said. Not quite a question. 30 years, Lone Timber said. We were young men together once, if you can believe an old man ever was young. I do not know how to properly grieve a friend who betrayed me and saved me both in the same short week. I am not certain such grief has a proper shape at all. Don't reckon it does, Cole said. Man learns to carry it anyway. Same as everything else this life asks of him. Lone Timber managed something close to a smile, tired, genuine. You have become wise for a man who arrived here 2 weeks ago knowing nothing of us at all. Had a good teacher, Cole said. Few of them, actually. Reckon I owe this whole camp more than I'll ever properly repay. Perhaps, Lone Timber said. Or perhaps debts, properly understood, run both directions eventually. I have learned that too, this week, alongside everything else. They stood together a while longer in the quiet, and Cole found himself thinking back to that first night by the original fire, Lone Timber's tired confession about arithmetic, that rarely balanced kindly. Numbers balance any better tonight? Cole asked. Then they did, that first evening you told me about them. Lone Timber considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. Better, he said finally. Not perfect. I do not think the arithmetic of a life like mine ever balances perfectly, not entirely, not with losses like the ones we have counted these past 2 weeks alongside everything gained. But better. Considerably better than I had any right to expect, when you first climbed down from that rock shelf and decided to become part of whatever this was going to become. Didn't decide much of anything that first day, Cole admitted. Just climbed down. Rest sort of built itself from there. Perhaps that is how the truest decisions always happen, Lone Timber said. Not as grand, deliberate choices, but as a man simply refusing to ride past something that needed him to stop. Cole thought about that a long moment, and found he had nothing to add that would improve on it. Reckon that's about the truth of it, he said finally. Lone Timber set a hand on his shoulder, the same gesture he'd offered that very first afternoon at the original water's edge, though it carried a different weight now, earned rather than merely hopeful. Rest, Cole Ashford, the old chief said. You have earned considerably more rest than this desert has allowed you these past 2 weeks. Tomorrow, we build something worth all of it. 2 days later, Cole rode north, with Fast Current for warriors as escort, Sam Whitmore riding alongside, as a witness willing to speak, and Crane bound, and silent behind them, toward the fort Cole remembered, from his scouting days, a squat collection of adobe, and timber sitting at the edge of country the army had only loosely finished mapping. The commanding officer, a weathered colonel named Hargrove, who'd clearly seen enough of this territory's particular brand of trouble not to be much surprised by any of it, studied the ledger, the contracts, the survey stakes Cole had also brought along, as evidence, with the slow, careful attention of a man who understood exactly how rare solid proof was out here, and exactly how much it was worth once a man finally had it in hand. "And you are," Hargrove said, eyes moving to Whitmore. "Worked for Crane's outfit 2 years, sir. Ready to tell you everything I know about how those contracts got filled, and how corners got cut to fill them cheap." Whitmore's voice held steady despite the obvious weight of what he was about to do. "Figure a man's got to answer for his own part in something eventually. This is me answering for mine." Hargrove studied him a long moment, the particular assessing look of an officer who'd heard plenty of false confessions in his time, and had learned to tell the true ones apart by something harder to fake than words alone. "Write it down," Hargrove said finally. "Everything. Dates, names, contract numbers, whatever you remember." Sworn statement. "I'll have a clerk assist you." "Yes, sir." Army's been chasing rumors about defective ordnance contracts for the better part of 2 years. Hargrove said finally, setting the ledger down. "Chasing rumors. Never proof. This." He tapped the ledger once, firm. "This is proof. 6 men," Cole said. "Under my command. Dead because of cartridges that never should have shipped." Hargrove studied him a long moment. "You have my condolences, Mr. Ashford. And you'll have my full cooperation besides. This man rides back to Washington in irons, if I have anything to say about it, and given what you've brought me, I expect I will. There's also the matter of the land." Fast Current said, stepping forward, his English careful, deliberate, clearly rehearsed on the ride up in case this exact moment required it. "The well's poisoned. The attack on our camp? That deserves answering too." Hargrove's eyes moved to Fast Current, taking his measure the way career officers generally take the measure of anyone they haven't yet decided whether to trust. "It does," Hargrove agreed. "And it will. Attempted murder's attempted murder, whatever the victim's tribe. I'll see survey claims in that territory frozen pending full investigation. Won't bring back what's already been lost. But it'll stop what hasn't happened yet. 2 soldiers came to lead Crane away then, toward a holding cell, that would serve, until proper transport east could be arranged. He went without struggle, the fight long, since drained out of him, though he paused once, briefly, looking back at Cole, with an expression that had finally, entirely, shed its earlier calculation. "You could have killed me," Crane said. "Out there. Nobody would have questioned it. Considered it," Cole admitted. "Considered it hard, if I'm honest with you." "Why didn't you?" Cole thought about that a long moment, before answering, because the man deserved an honest answer, however little he'd earned it. "Because a bullet would have been about me," Cole said finally. "This is about them. The men who died on cartridges you sold cheap. The families who buried them, without ever knowing why. Reckon they're owed more than my satisfaction. Owed the truth, spoken plain, in a room that has to listen." Crane didn't have an answer for that. The soldiers led him off, and Cole watched him go, without any particular satisfaction, only a settled, quiet certainty that he'd chosen the harder, better path through this, exactly the way Lone Timber had once counseled him to. Cole spoke with the colonel privately, before they rode back, one more matter sitting on his mind, that he hadn't quite found the shape of asking about until now. "My grandfather scouted this territory," Cole said. "Years back. Ezra Ashford. Rode with Army patrols same, as I did, some seasons. Wondered if there's any record of land agreements he might have helped broker. Boundaries recognized, promises made, that kind of thing." Hargrove considered this, then had a clerk pull a heavy, dust-covered ledger from a back room, flipping through pages yellowed with age until he found what he was looking for. "Ashford," he said, tapping an entry. 1847, scouting report and boundary recommendation, filed alongside a treaty survey. Recommends the spring country south of the Twin Rock Formation be recognized as protected tribal ground, unsuitable for settlement claims. He looked up. Your grandfather's signature, if this is the same man. Cole took the ledger, hands not quite steady, and found Ezra's familiar, deliberate handwriting staring back at him across 16 years, a message from a dead man to a grandson, who hadn't known, until this exact moment, that he'd been carrying his grandfather's unfinished promise the whole time, without knowing its name. Same man, Cole said, voice rough. That's my grandfather's hand. He read the entry twice, slow, the words swimming a little, before his eyes settled properly onto them. 16 years. Ezra would have been not much older than Cole was now, riding this same country, sitting with these same people's parents and grandparents around fires not so different from the ones Cole had sat beside these past 2 weeks, learning enough to write a recommendation that some careful, patient part of him must have hoped would matter someday, to somebody, even if he never lived to see it matter. Because that was the thing about planting something, Cole thought. A man rarely got to see the whole of what grew from it. Ezra Ashford had died not knowing whether this particular seed would ever take root. He'd simply planted it anyway, trusted the ground, and let time do the rest of the work without him. Then you've got more than proof of fraud today, Mr. Ashford. Hargrove closed the ledger, satisfied. You've got a legal boundary, recognized and recorded, that Crane's survey never should have crossed in the first place. I'll see it enforced going forward. Have my word on that. Cole stood there a long moment, the weight of it settling slow, the way water settles, into ground that has waited a long time to receive it. His grandfather's old fireside stories hadn't just been stories, it turned out. They'd been a promise, made long before Cole was ever born, finally coming due at exactly the moment it was needed most. He thought of himself, as a boy, half asleep on a bedroll, listening to that same voice describe a stone eagle, and a hidden spring like it was simply another tall tale meant to entertain a child, before sleep took him. He never once imagined, back then, that the story carried inside it an actual promise, filed away in a dusty ledger 200 miles from where it was told, waiting patiently across 16 years for a grandson it couldn't have known would ever come looking for it. Obliged, Cole said finally, to Hargrove, though the word felt too small for everything it was meant to carry. More than I know how to properly say. Man does his job, Hargrove said, waving it off, though something in his weathered face suggested he understood the weight of the moment regardless. Paperwork's paperwork, until suddenly it isn't. Glad I could be the one who found it for you. They rode back to camp 3 days later, Crane left behind in Hargrove's custody, Whitmore's sworn statement filed alongside the ledger and contracts, the surviving members of his outfit held for questioning, the whole weight of the operation that had threatened this water finally, properly, dismantled. The ride back felt different than the ride north had. Lighter, though the miles were exactly the same. Cole found himself noticing things he'd missed on the way up, the particular way afternoon light caught the red rock formations scattered across this country, the resilience of the few hardy plants that had learned to thrive where nothing reasonable should. Fast Current rode easy beside him, humming something low under his breath that Cole didn't recognize, but found himself, by the second day, humming along to regardless. You're different, Fast Current observed, somewhere on the second afternoon, studying Cole with the particular assessing look he'd once reserved only for enemies. How's that? Lighter. Same as this whole journey feels lighter than the one north did. Fast Current considered his next words carefully. I think, perhaps, you have finally set down something you have been carrying a very long time. Cole thought about that, turning it over slow. Maybe, he admitted. 2 years, carrying that ravine around, with me, not knowing whose door to finally set it down at. Reckon I found the door. Feels strange, not carrying it anymore. Good kind of strange. Grief does not disappear entirely. Fast Current said. I have learned this much, from watching you, and from losing people of my own. But it changes shape, once a person finally answers what needed answering. Becomes something a man can carry alongside himself, instead of something that carries him. Cole nodded slow, letting that settle. Wise words for a man not much past 25. I have had considerable cause to grow wise quickly these past 2 weeks. Fast Current said, something almost like humor threading back into his voice for the first time since the battle. Cowboys riding into deserts uninvited tend to accelerate a man's education considerably. News of the fort's decision reached camp. Before they did, a rider sent ahead, urgent, exhausted, delivering word that survey claims were frozen, that federal charges were being prepared against Crane, and what remained of his company, that the boundary Ezra Ashford had recorded 16 years earlier now stood recognized, protected, no longer merely a grandfather's fireside story, but a matter of official record. The camp that greeted Cole and Fast Current on their return was different than the one they'd left. Lighter, somehow, despite the grave still fresh at its eastern edge. The particular lightness that comes only after a fear has finally, completely, been allowed to set down. Willow's song reached Fast Current first, running the last stretch of ground between them, without any pretense of the careful distance custom had always demanded before. He caught her, lifted her clean off her feet, and for one long moment neither of them seemed to care who was watching. Cole watched it happen, with something warm settling behind his ribs, an ache that had nothing to do with the 3 days of hard riding. Because that was what all of it had been for, in the end. Not just water. Not just land. This. 2 people finally allowed to stand exactly where they'd always belonged standing, without a debt, or a duty, or a stranger's arrival standing between them any longer. That evening, the full council gathered one final time, Lone Timber, the remaining elders, the 22 women, the whole camp assembled in the same clearing, where this had all begun less than 2 weeks before, though it felt, to everyone present, considerably longer than that. Iron Bluff stood near the front, and Cole noted the change in his expression, from that first skeptical morning, no longer suspicion, but something closer to genuine respect, hard won across 2 weeks of watching a stranger prove himself in ways words alone could never have accomplished. Cole Ashford. Lone Timber's voice carried the same formal weight it had carried that first ceremony, though something in his bearing had shifted, softened, the particular ease of a man no longer carrying quite so heavy a burden of fear for his people's future. You have passed every trial asked of you. You have bled for us. You brought justice to the man who tried to destroy us. The debt this camp owes you has grown considerably larger than the one we first tried to answer. Wasn't looking to grow it, Cole said. Just doing what needed doing. Most debts worth having grow exactly that way. Lone Timber gestured toward the line of women, seated now rather than standing, the formal presentation of days, before replaced by something gentler. You have the right, still, to name your own answer to this debt. I ask you again, formally, before this whole council. What is your solution, Cole Ashford? Cole stood, and found, for the first time in this whole ordeal, that the words came easy, clear, exactly shaped the way he'd wanted them, since that very first morning standing, before this same line of frightened, hopeful faces. I want to build a trading post, he said. Right here, beside this spring. A place where your people can trade freely, furs, crafts, whatever you make, with your own hands, with honest traders I'll help bring in myself. A place that makes this water worth more to everyone standing near it than it was ever worth to a man like Crane trying to steal it outright. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd, surprised, considering. Quiet rain rose slowly, studying Cole a long moment before speaking. This is not the answer I expected, when you first asked for these trials. I confess I believed you sought merely to delay an inevitable acceptance, or to find some clever escape from an honor you found inconvenient. She paused, something like approval finally softening her sharp features. I was wrong about you, Cole Ashford. I say this plainly, because an old woman, who cannot admit her errors has learned nothing worth teaching to those who come after her. Obliged for saying so, Cole said. Wasn't easy earning that, and I know it. And the women? Iron Bluff asked. You still refuse them? I do. Cole looked down the line, meeting each face in turn, the way he'd forced himself to, that very first terrible morning. Not because they're unworthy. Every one of you is worth more than I could ever properly repay. But my heart's spoken for already, even if the woman it belongs to isn't standing among the living anymore. Wouldn't be honest, giving any of you less than what a marriage deserves. He turned to Willow Song, standing near her father, hands still loosely laced, with fast currents despite the formal setting. There's one more piece to this, Cole said. With the chief's blessing, I'd ask that the debt include this instead. Let Fast Current and Willow Song marry, openly, with the whole council's full support, same as they'd have married years back, if this desert hadn't taken so much from all of you first. That's worth more to me, settling this, than anything else you could offer. Lone Timber was quiet a long moment, looking between his nephew and his daughter, something working behind his weathered face that took its time resolving into words. I have watched them love each other since they were children, he said, finally, voice thick. I told myself, these past years, that honor required I look past it, that a chief's daughter belonged wherever duty placed her, not wherever her heart wandered. I have learned a hard lesson this past week about the difference between honor and cruelty wearing honor's clothing. Willow Song stepped forward then, unbidden, something steady and sure in her bearing, that Cole hadn't seen from her since that very first afternoon at the water's edge, when she'd carried an old woman's weight without complaint. Father, she said, voice carrying clear across the gathered council. I have stood silent through most of this, as custom asked of me. I will not stand silent through this last part. I love Fast Current. I have loved him since before I understood what the word properly meant. I would have honored whatever decision this council reached, because that is what I was raised to do. But I am glad, more than I know how to say plainly, that I do not have to choose between honoring my people and honoring my own heart any longer. A murmur of approval moved through the gathered crowd, warm, genuine, the particular sound a community makes when watching something long overdue finally arrive. Lone Timber looked to Fast Current, then to Willow Song, and something in his face broke open, finally, gently, into something like joy long deferred. I release you both from any promise made in my name that stood between you. Marry, with my blessing, and with the blessing of every person standing here, who has watched you both earn it. Willow Song's composure, held so carefully, through everything, finally broke, tears spilling freely now, though nothing about her expression looked anything like grief. Fast Current pulled her close, and this time, nobody in the whole gathered camp looked away. Cole Ashford, Lone Timber said, turning back, voice steadying. Your solution is accepted. The debt is answered fully, and beyond what honor could have reasonably demanded of you in the first place. You are, from this day, considered family by this camp. Not guest. Not stranger. Family. Cole felt something shift loose in his chest at that word, something that had been sitting tight and guarded there since a fever took Rachel 3 states away from where he needed to be standing. Family. It had been a long while since anyone had offered him that word and meant it the whole way through. The wedding took place 4 days later, timed to a moon the elders considered favorable, though Cole suspected the real timing had more to do with how quickly 2 people who'd waited years for permission were willing to wait even 1 day longer than necessary once permission finally arrived. The whole camp turned out in its finest, the same clothes worn for that first terrible ceremony now serving a considerably happier purpose. Willow Song wore her turquoise stone, polished now to a brilliance the desert dust had long obscured, and a dress worked with beadwork that had clearly taken more than one woman's careful hours to finish in time. Flowers Cole hadn't even known grew in this harsh country had been gathered somehow, woven into her hair, into garlands strung between the tent poles, proof that even the hardest ground eventually offered up something worth celebrating with, if a person knew where and how to look. The spring itself had been decorated too, small offerings placed at its edge, a gesture of gratitude Cole understood, without needing it explained, this water had given them everything, in the end, and it seemed only right that the day meant to celebrate everything that water had made possible should honor the source of it directly. Fast Current stood waiting at the water's edge, dressed in clothes finer than Cole had yet seen him wear, and Cole, watching from near the back of the gathered crowd, noted the particular stillness in him, not nervousness exactly, more the deep, settled quiet of a man finally arriving somewhere he'd been walking toward his entire life. Lone Timber performed the ceremony himself, voice carrying warm and sure across the gathered camp, words in Apache that Cole still couldn't follow completely, but understood perfectly regardless, the same way he'd understood that first night's grief songs, without needing translation. There was something universal in the shape of it, Cole thought, watching the particular cadence every culture seemed to reach for, when marking a promise meant to outlast everything else a life might throw against it. The hand drum returned, steady, joyful now instead of merely comforting, and voices rose around it in a song Cole recognized from that first celebration night, after the horse race, except fuller now, richer, carrying the particular weight of a whole community's relief finally allowed to express itself without reservation. When Fast Current and Willow's song finally turned to face the crowd together, hands joined, the whole camp erupted into something between celebration and prayer, cheering and singing tangled together in a joy that had been a long, hard road arriving. The feast that followed stretched long into the evening, tables of food Cole hadn't known this camp could produce, until he watched it appear, dish by careful dish, from women who'd clearly been saving provisions, and skilled both for exactly an occasion like this one. Roasted meat, flatbread, dried fruit soaked back to sweetness, all of it shared freely, generously, the particular abundance that comes only after real scarcity has finally, properly, lifted. Lone Timber rose partway through the meal, raising a clay cup toward the newly married couple. "I have led this people through hard years," he said, voice carrying clear across the gathered crowd. "Years of losing more than we gained, of burying more than we welcomed. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I care to count, I stand here having gained considerably more than we lost. A daughter married to the man she has always loved. A grave honoring a friend, who found his true measure at the very end. A trading post rising that will feed and clothe this camp for years to come. And a cowboy." His eyes found Cole across the fire, warm, genuine, who rode in meaning only to pass through, and stayed instead to become family. He raised the cup higher. To Fast Current and Willow's song. To Gray Feather's memory. To Cole Ashford. And to whatever comes next, which I find myself, for the first time in years, genuinely eager to discover. The whole camp raised whatever they held in answer, cups, bowls, bare hands, and the sound that followed, warm and full, and entirely unguarded, was one Cole suspected he'd carry with him for however many years remained to him, same as he carried Rachel, same as he carried the ravine, same as every true thing that had ever properly marked him. Later, once the celebration had settled into the easier rhythm of food and firelight and old men telling stories that grew more impressive with each retelling, Willow's song found Cole sitting a little apart, same as always, watching rather than fully belonging to the center of things. "You look like a man thinking too hard for a wedding," she said, settling beside him, careful distance abandoned now that there was no longer any careful distance left to maintain between them. "Reckon I am." Cole allowed himself a small smile. "Good kind of thinking, though. About her." Not a question. Willow's song had grown skilled, these past 2 weeks, at reading exactly what kind of silence Cole carried and when. "About her," he admitted. "About how she'd have liked this. All of it. The wedding. This place. You and Fast Current getting the ending you both fought so hard toward." "Tell me about her," Willow's song said gently. "If you're willing. I find I would like to know her, even secondhand, given how much she still seems to matter to the man who helped save my whole world." Cole considered that request a long moment, surprised by how little it cost him to answer, compared to how much it would have cost just 2 weeks before. Rachel, he said. Quick with a laugh. Quicker with an opinion, if you asked for one, and sometimes even if you didn't. Married her knowing full well the war would take me east, within the month, and she married me anyway. Told me plain she'd rather have 2 good months than a lifetime of wondering what might have been. He looked into the fire. Told me to come back whole, not safe. I've thought about the difference between those 2 words more times than I could rightly count these past 2 years. Did you? Come back whole, I mean. Didn't think so for a long while. Figured whole died, with her, same afternoon that fever took her, from me before I ever got the letter. Cole was quiet a moment. Reckon I've started wondering different lately. Maybe whole isn't a thing a man loses once, and never gets back. Maybe it's something he has to go looking for again, in different shapes, in different places than he first found it. And have you found it? Here. Cole looked around at the fire, at the whole camp settled, into easy celebration around it, at fast current, and Willow's songs joined hands not 20 feet off, at a trading post frame rising slow against the darkening sky. Getting there, he said honestly. Closer than I've been, since I rode east, anyhow. You could have that too, Willow's song said gently. Someday. It doesn't dishonor her, choosing to live fully again eventually. I don't believe love works the way grief sometimes tries convincing us it does, that loving again means loving less before. Cole considered that a long moment, turning it over the same careful way he turned over everything that mattered. Maybe, he said. Not today, though. Maybe not for a good while yet. But I hear you. And I thank you for saying it plain instead of dancing around it. I learned plain speaking from a cowboy who never once danced around anything himself. She said, something warm and teasing finally allowed into her voice now that the weight of these past 2 weeks had finally, properly, lifted. Seemed only right to return the favor. Cole laughed, real and easy, and found, sitting there beside a fire that had become, somehow, without his fully noticing the transition, something closer to home than anywhere he'd stood in longer than he could easily remember. That night, alone in his bedroll, Cole dreamed of Rachel one final time. Not the gentle, unfinished dream from weeks before. Something more complete this time, more settled. She stood at the same gate, same as always, except now the gate opened onto this exact desert instead of the home they'd shared, the spring visible behind her, the trading post frame rising against the sky gone gold, with evening light. She looked well. Looked like herself, fully, the particular half-smile she'd always worn, when she knew something Cole hadn't quite figured out yet. You found it, she said. Whole. Found what? He asked, in the dream's strange logic already half understanding the answer, before he'd finished asking. What I meant, all along. Not safe. Never just safe. Whole. He woke before dawn, chest tight but not aching, the particular tightness of a feeling settling into its proper place instead of straining against a wound that refused to close. He lay there a long while, looking up at stars fading slow toward morning, and understood, finally, completely, that grief and gratitude could share the same chest, without either one canceling the other out. That loving Rachel fully, entirely, for the whole of what she'd been to him, didn't require him to stop living the life still stretched out ahead. That she'd have wanted exactly this, a husband who'd ridden east, and lost everything, finding his way, eventually, to somewhere he could stand solid again. He rose before the rest of camp stirred, walked out to where Duke grazed the sparse grass near the spring's edge, and stood there a long while, just breathing, just being present in a morning that no longer felt like something to simply survive. Whole, he thought. That was the word for it. Not finished. He understood that much clearly enough, standing there in the gray early light. A trading post still needed building. A camp still needed rebuilding around a grave it hadn't finished grieving. Whole wasn't an ending a man arrived at, and then stopped. It was closer to a direction he could finally see clear enough to keep walking toward. He led Duke back toward camp, where the day's work was already waiting. Construction on the trading post began the following week. Cole rode 2 days to the nearest settlement, and returned with lumber, tools, and the promise of an honest trader named Sullivan who'd agreed, after a long conversation about fair prices and fairer treatment, to be the first to set up regular trade with the camp. Word spread fast through country that had, until recently, offered these people nothing but wells poisoned and land stolen out from under them, one broken promise at a time. The night before he'd ridden out, Cole had finally sat down and written the letter he'd been carrying, unsent, for the better part of 2 weeks. He'd read Whitfield's original offer. So many times the words had worn soft in his memory, and now he read his own reply, over twice before deciding it said everything it needed to, and nothing more. Mr. Whitfield, he'd written, I regret I won't be taking the foreman's position after all. Circumstance found me on the road out here, and it turned into something I didn't expect, and couldn't rightly walk away from once I understood the shape of it. I'm obliged for the offer, and for your patience waiting on my answer longer than any reasonable employer ought to have. Wish you and the ranch well, Cole Ashford. Short. Plain. Everything a letter like that needed to be, and nothing it didn't. He'd send it off, with the same writer, who carried word to the fort, and hadn't thought much on it since, except to notice, each time it crossed his mind, how little weight the decision carried now compared to how much it might have weighed him down 2 weeks earlier. Fast Current worked beside him most days on the trading post itself, the two of them falling into an easy rhythm that needed fewer words, with every passing week, the particular comfortable silence that grows between men who've already said, through action, everything that mattered most to say. Whitfield's offer still stand, you figure? Fast Current said one afternoon, setting a post into ground they'd cleared together. Your job at the ranch. Presumably it's still out there, waiting on a man who never showed. Doubt it, past a certain point, Cole said, testing the post's stability with one hand. Wrote Whitfield a letter last week, matter of fact. Told him I wouldn't be coming after all. Politely as I could manage it. And now I reckon I'm exactly where I mean to be. Cole looked out at the half-built frame of the trading post, at the spring beyond it catching the afternoon light, at a camp that had become, somewhere in these past weeks, considerably more than a stop along a road he'd once meant to simply pass through. Man spends a year running, from one temporary thing to the next, telling himself he's just between destinations. Took nearly dying a few times in a desert to teach me the difference between moving and actually arriving somewhere. Fast Current nodded slow, understanding fully, needing no further explanation. Then welcome home, Cowboy, he said. Properly this time. Obliged, Cole said. Properly this time. Sullivan arrived 2 weeks later, wagon loaded with goods, expression cautious in the particular way of a man who'd agreed to something his own instincts were still catching up to trusting fully. That caution didn't survive the day. Word had traveled ahead of him, and the whole camp turned out to greet the wagon's arrival, curious, welcoming, none of the wariness Sullivan had clearly braced himself for anywhere in evidence. By mid-afternoon he traded half his goods for furs, and beadwork fine enough that he kept turning pieces over in his hands, visibly recalculating, in real time, exactly how profitable this particular arrangement stood to become. Never seen craft work like this, he admitted to Cole, examining a woven blanket Willow Song's own hands had finished that week. Man could make a fair living, trading honest with folks who make things this well. That's rather the idea, Cole said. Your idea? Camp's idea, mostly. I just helped put the building up around it. Sullivan studied him a moment, something like respect settling into his weathered face. Word in town was you'd gone soft in the head, giving up a foreman's wage to play trader out in the middle of nowhere. Reckon word in town's got it wrong. Word in town usually does, Cole said. Man learns that much, spending enough time out past where the town's opinion actually reaches. By evening, the trading post's first day of business had done more good, tangible and countable, than Cole suspected any single trial or battle had managed across the whole preceding month. Not the dramatic kind of good. The quiet, sustaining kind. The kind that would still be doing its work long after everyone who lived through this particular story had themselves passed into memory. That felt, to Cole, like exactly the right kind of good to have spent these past weeks building toward. He found Lone Timber watching the day's trading wind down, from a quiet distance, the same patient stillness the old chief seemed to carry into every important moment, large or small. Different kind of victory, this, Lone Timber observed, as Cole came to stand beside him. Quieter than the one 2 weeks back. I find I prefer it considerably. Reckon most people would, Cole said. Battles make for better stories. Peace makes for better living, though. Man could stand to remember that distinction more often than he generally does. You sound like an old man yourself tonight. Feel like one, some days. Reckon this territory ages a person faster than most. Lone Timber allowed himself a rare, easy laugh. Perhaps. Or perhaps some men simply arrive already carrying enough years inside them to skip the slow accumulation altogether. He grew more serious. I have led this people 11 years, Cole Ashford. I want you to know that this, all of this, everything standing here today, is the first time in all those years I have watched a season turn out better than I feared it would. Wasn't just me that did that, Cole said. Whole camp fought for it. Bled for it. Buried a good man for it. True, Lone Timber agreed. But you were the stone that started the water moving, all those weeks back, on a rock formation you'd never have found, if a horse hadn't spooked at exactly the right moment, on exactly the right afternoon. He shook his head slow, something like wonder still present in his weathered face even now, weeks after the fact. I do not generally believe in fate, Cole Ashford. I have seen too much hard luck to trust that word easily. But I confess some days I wonder. Wonder what? Whether your grandfather's story was ever really about a spring at all. Or whether the spring was simply the excuse the desert needed to finally deliver the man who was meant to find his way here eventually regardless. Cole considered that a long moment, watching the last of Sullivan's wagon disappear over the ridge, watching Willow's song laugh at something Fast Curran had said, watching a trading post stand solid against the sky going gold with evening. Might be, he said finally. Either way, reckon I'm obliged to that horse. Wherever he ended up. Autumn came slow to that stretch of desert, the heat finally loosening its grip by careful degrees, and by the time the trading post's roof went up complete, the spring beside it had become something Cole could hardly picture the land without anymore. Travelers passed through now, where once they'd only have passed by, trading fair, treated fair, word of an honest post beside honest water spreading the particular way good news travels slow, but sure through hard country. A family of settlers came, through in October, wary at first, and left 3 days later having traded goods, shared meals, and promised to spread word further along their route that this particular stretch of desert offered something considerably rarer than water alone, a place where people, whoever they were, however they'd arrived, were simply treated as people. Willow's song carried herself different these days, lighter, steadier, the particular ease of a woman no longer bracing against the future she hadn't chosen. She'd taken to helping run the trading post ledgers, a skill Cole discovered she possessed in spades once given the chance to use it, careful and precise in a way that would have made her father proud even without the marriage that had finally, properly, been allowed to happen. Fast Curran had taken to teaching some of the younger warriors, though there were fewer young ones than there should have been, this camp having paid its own hard cost across years of being pushed, from one ground to the next, the same tracking and defense he'd once shown a suspicious cowboy who'd ridden in out of nowhere. Cole watched him some afternoons, patient, thorough, clearly finding in the teaching itself something of the purpose that had once driven his fury toward strangers, now redirected toward building instead of merely guarding. Gray Feather's grave, tended faithfully by Lone Timber himself most mornings, had become something the whole camp visited eventually, not out of obligation, but out of a settled, complicated gratitude that Cole suspected would take considerably longer than one season to fully understand. Someone had planted a small stand of desert wildflowers beside the marker, hardy things that had no business blooming in ground this unforgiving, and yet did, stubborn and bright, every single morning regardless. Sam Whitmore rode through twice that autumn, first to deliver word that Crane's trial date had been set, federal charges confirmed, conviction all but certain given the weight of evidence against him, and second simply because, as he put it, he'd found himself, with nowhere better to be, and this particular stretch of desert had started feeling considerably more like somewhere worth returning to than anywhere else he'd known. Cole stood at the spring's edge one evening, watching the water catch the last orange light of a sun sliding down toward rock that still, from exactly this angle, looked like an eagle, with its wings spread wide. He thought of his grandfather then, the way he often did lately, though the thinking had lost most of its old ache somewhere along the road these past weeks had carried him down. Ezra Ashford had left him a story once, half believed, half doubted, carried across 28 years, without ever fully trusting its truth. The story had turned out to be more than a story. A promise. Kept, finally, generations later, exactly when it was needed most. Cole wondered, watching the water settle calm and clear in the dying light, what promises he himself might be leaving behind someday, for whoever came looking for them next. A trading post that treated people fair. A boundary honored instead of stolen. A friendship forged between a cowboy and a warrior who'd once, briefly, meant to be enemies, and had chosen, instead, to become something considerably more lasting. He supposed he had time, yet to find out the rest of it. Duke nosed at his shoulder, patient, unbothered, same as always, and Cole scratched the old gelding's neck, allowing himself, finally, fully, the particular quiet that comes only after a long road has actually, truly, ended somewhere worth arriving. Somewhere he could rightly call, without qualification, without hesitation, home. The spring kept flowing. The stone eagle kept watch. And Cole Ashford, cowboy, cavalry scout, a man who had once ridden through this country meaning only to pass through it, stayed.